Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program. Today is the Women's Suffrage Movement, edited by Sally Roche Wagner. It is a collection of essays by a whole variety of people, from Gloria Steinem to onward. This is from the foreword. With the women's suffrage movement, Sally Roche Wagner has given us a unique gift: the real words and actions, writings and debates of white and black women who fought for over a century to gain an identity as free human beings and citizens. For most of those years, black women were legally owned as chattel, forced to work and to suffer the unique punishment of giving birth to children who were also enslaved. White women were not as restricted and endangered as African women or men, but as the daughters and wives of white men, they were also legal chattel with no right to leave their homes, disobey orders, profit from their own work, speak in public, have custody of their own children, own property without a guardian, or affect the patriarchal laws that governed their lives. Even many white men who fought against slavery supported this subordinate position of their wives and daughters. When Susan B. Anthony, an abolitionist and a suffragist, sheltered not only runaway slaves, but white wives escaping violent husbands, male abolitionist allies warned her that she was going too far. As Frederick Douglass, a freed slave abolitionist and suffragist himself, wrote in his autobiography, "When the true history of the anti-slavery cause shall be written, women will occupy a large space in its pages, for the cause of the slave has been peculiarly women's cause." And this despite the fact that many white women, especially not only in the South, aided and abetted black slavery and accepted their own subordinate position as natural. A century later, Gunnar Myrdal would explain in his landmark study of slavery that enslaved African women and men brought to these shores had been given the legal status of wives as the nearest and most natural analogy to the status of slaves. As he added, quote, "The parallel between women and Negroes is the deepest truth of American life, for together they form the unpaid or underpaid labor on which America runs," end quote. Wagner takes us into the rooms, writings, and discussions where white and black women and black men, all fighting for legal personhood and full citizenship, were both a miracle of shared purpose, despite all the lethal forces keeping them apart, and a tragedy of division that echoes in the need for intersectionality and inclusion in this day. Even the lynching of black men, crimes designed to maintain the racial order after the Civil War, was most often justified by proximity to white women, however imaginary or freely chosen. This tells us how dangerous and brave was the coalition for universal adult suffrage that you will read about here. It also reveals the betrayal when white men split the coalition apart by offering the vote to black men first, only to then limit their votes with poll taxes, impossible literacy tests, and violence. Yet despite this tragic division, and despite being labeled as varying degrees of non-human, this fractious rebellion and fragile coalition did eventually succeed in gaining citizenship for the majority of people in this country. Wagner brings us these imperfect and hopeful rebellions of the past as they happened, complete with divisions and debates, and a long organizational disagreement among suffragists about whether to seek the vote by federal amendment or state by state. She doesn't attempt to prove a thesis or to explain mistakes or to excuse destructive divisions. Other than the first and last chapters, each one with a very specific purpose, she doesn't insert herself at all. Instead, she allows us to witness the words and acts, dreams and disappointments, victories and defeats, visionary ideas and tactical errors of people fighting a battle that laid the basis for our continuing movement against hierarchies based on race and gender. It is this faithfulness to the past that allows us to learn lessons for changes in the present. In 30 years or so, this will no longer be a majority white country. It will better reflect the diversity that has always been its strength and its promise. Indeed, the first generation that is majority babies of color has already been born, and public opinion polls already show that the majority of Americans no longer support divisions by race or by gender. Yet there is also a lethal backlash from about a third of the country, including over half of white married women, among often those without a college education, who want to preserve their unearned place in the social and economic hierarchy. That's why these victories and defeats of the past become the best possible lessons and warnings for our present and future. By taking us into the rooms where history happened, Wagner allows us to see the parallels and differences, empathy and estrangements, connections and isolations that can hinder or help our goals now. Almost none of the people we will meet in these pages will live to celebrate the changes they are working for. This should tell us that social justice movements are not a temporary part of our lives. They are our lives. Most of the activists here were not sure that slavery would be abolished or that universal adult suffrage would ever succeed. This should give us humility about what we can predict and also arm us with faith and patience. Few guessed that the legal right to vote would come a half century later for white and black women than for black men, but would be mostly on paper. In the South, where most black Americans live, it would take another century plus an entire civil rights movement to overcome procedural and sometimes lethal barriers to voting. This should make us skeptical about changes that come from the top and that divide us more than empower us. And there are other lessons, and it continues, the women's suffrage movement. My friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It is Wednesday. It's midweek, time for Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the second district of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Real glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So there's a lot going on right now. And by the way, I should add it for new listeners, you will be with us for the entire hour taking people's calls at 202-808-9925. So if anybody has an issue they want to bring to your attention or a question for you or whatever it may be, give us a shout. So Nancy Pelosi, this is like, she's like a karate expert or something. I mean, this is jujitsu. This is amazing. Using Trump's own desire for publicity against him, saying, well, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson delivered their State of the Union addresses in writing. You can too. It's pretty amazing.
Well, I mean, obviously, I always explain back home. Donald Trump is probably first a reality show star, second a scheming businessman, and maybe third a president of the United States. Unfortunately, that's how he looked at the job. And he loves, a camera and the press, and he would love to do the State of the Union and say all kinds of things to blame Democrats. And I think, Nancy Pelosi took him right to task and said, fine, if we're still shut down, it's probably not a good idea to have the State of the Union. And I think it goes, after some of the craziness he's done. I mean, just this week we're ordering back 46,000 furloughed IRS workers to work but no pay, 3,600 people in the FAA. This guy doesn't understand that when he does this, this juvenile approach to how he runs the country, that real people are impacted. And now we're asking more people to go back to work for no pay. It's completely unacceptable. It's crazy. And I think that she took him to task so strongly is smart. And we've got to figure out how to get the government reopened. The economy is hurting. Even the Trump administration doubled their estimates. This is going to cost the economy. It's time to have some adult behavior.
Meanwhile, now that the Democrats are actually running the House of Representatives, really good legislation is being passed, a national raise to $15 an hour by 2024.
Yeah, in fact, this afternoon we're announcing, and I'm one of the lead sponsors with Bobby Scott, who chairs the Ed and Labor Committee, a bill to raise the minimum wage to $15, as you said, by 2024, immediately start getting the wage to go up, like so many states and local communities have increased the wage. But, you know, no family can live on $15,000 a year, and, you know, less than 10% of the people who get who receive the minimum wage right now are under 20. You know, so this is one of these myths, right? It's a teenager, it's someone who's just doing this for pocket money. No, like the median age is in the mid-30s. These are real people working. It'll increase the pay for 40 million people in this country, and it's going to be one of the priority bills that we move through Congress.
Yeah, the amazing thing is that I believe that when I was a teenager, the minimum wage actually was mostly the teenage wage, and most wage earners had, you know, a union job or its equivalent, about 2/3 of the economy, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, I love when I go to a school, I always ask that question, what percent of people do you think who make minimum wage are teenagers? And, you know, usually I get answers like 70%, 50%,
Right.
6 or 9.8%. So it really shows these are people who are just working and working poor in this country, and we're long, long overdue. Doesn't matter where you live in the country, you should have a wage that can support your family.
Yeah, amen. So shall we pick up some phone calls?
Absolutely.
Okay, Richard in Calumet, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hey, Mark. I'm a disabled person, and I've got a friend in your state that's disabled. We're having problems getting our medications. I'm hearing that they're going to cut our food stamps here next month. And what do we do?
Is that because of the shutdown, Richard?
That's what I'm being told.
Yeah, so Richard, I think I just saw something come across my desk this morning that February you should be fine, but they are saying if it goes beyond that, they do have some structural issues. They're going to make it very difficult. And this is Donald Trump's problem. He doesn't realize that people actually rely on the services of the federal government. You know, maybe Donald Trump, when he was a developer, didn't in the same ways, but most people do have a connection to how government works for them, and it's going to negatively affect a lot of people. So this week again, we've put several proposals to reopen the government. I think the most important is we've been putting out reopen every agency but Homeland Security, bump funding for them for another month so they're funded. And if we really want to have a talk about border security, let's do that. But holding everything hostage, including tax refunds and supplemental nutrition assistance and other things, is a really awful idea. And we're keep gaining Republican support as we do this. In polling, we're gaining. So I hope eventually we can get the president to do the right thing. But, you know, this is not the way. There are not major civilized countries that have regular shutdowns like we do. We stand out for this dysfunction, and it's not something we should be proud of.
David in Mamaroneck, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is I read a lot of financial statements at night, and I'm looking at America's got $9 trillion in corporate debt. And I look at companies like Ford. I mean, 50% of their last financial statement, interest expense was as a ratio of their operating income. I mean, that's what's really squeezing the UAW salaries. It's really squeezing salaries across the country. And, you know, when you look at their balance sheets, most of that debt went to stock buybacks or directly to owners' compensation, officers' compensation. What is Congress? Is anybody in Congress looking at this stuff, calling it out, having plans for it, or are we just going to have another bailout? Thank you.
Yeah, David, so I think what we're not necessarily addressing is the debt, but what you mentioned, what the debt is being spent on. So when it's spent on stock buybacks and additional pay and stock incentives for boards of directors. That's not going to employees. It's not being reinvested in the company. That is lost money. And, when the tax breaks that were passed at the end of 2017 by Republicans, 83% of that money goes to the top 1%. This is exactly what we're seeing. This is bad for the economy. This is bad for businesses. And people are talking about it. Sometimes it's harder to get everyone in the media to understand what we're talking about as far as the extent of this. But I think you will have another wave looking at this when people start to get their W-2s, which they're getting right now. And when they file their taxes, you're going to find a lot of people who were promised a cut and didn't get one. And I think it's going to reinvigorate the conversation about where the money's going. So I'm hopeful of that.
Mary in Las Vegas, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning. I am unimpressed with Barr's testimony the other day. I think he's been out of the loop for too long, 25 or 30 years. With regard to the emoluments clause, he should have a real good understanding of that. I'm beginning to think he's Trump's Ray Cohn, and it's scary. He talks about the possibility of locking reporters up. What, other than the Fox opinion comment people? And then he doesn't want to take the ethics committee's his opinion is the last straw on whether to put forward Mueller's findings. Then what's the point of having an ethics committee? These are scary times. And also, as an aside, I have a friend who works for a company that does defense work. 2 more weeks, he says, and they're having layoffs.
Mary, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Mary, to Barr, one of the things that Tom and I was talking about a little earlier, not on the show, but is the fact that, Barr's history goes back to advising Bush about pardoning folks during the Iran-Contra investigation. So, now if this person is the one consulting the president, what does that mean? So he may have said some good things in committee about making sure the Mueller investigation continues, but if he just has end-run ideas on how to get around it, then you were certainly not any better off. So I hope that the Senate spends a good time having this research about him and debating, because there certainly are, I think, a lot more questions, as you pointed out.
Yeah, this is the headline from December 25th, 1992, New York Times. Bush pardons 6 in Iran affair, aborting a Weinberger trial. Prosecutor assails cover-up. That's just the headline. And then it says, in a single stroke, Mr. Bush swept away 1 conviction, 3 guilty pleas, and 2 pending cases, virtually decapitating what was left of Special Prosecutor Walsh's efforts. Mr. Walsh bitterly condemned the president's action, charging that, quote, the Iran-Contra cover-up, which has continued for more than 6 years, has now been completed. And he added, the prosecutor charged that Mr. Weinberger's efforts to hide his notes may have forestalled impeachment proceedings against President Reagan and formed part of a pattern of deception and obstruction. And apparently Barr was right in the middle of all this. It's pretty amazing. I mean, people just don't even read the New York Times, from 1992.
Exactly.
Anyhow, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, and we'll be back with your calls in just a moment. You can check out Congressman Pocan's website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative Rep Mark Pocan. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's talk media for the sane among us, the Thom Hartmann Program. Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. And welcome back. Danny in Bow, Washington, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thanks, Tom. This is actually the very first time I've ever called into a TV station. I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you.
My question is, and I've wondered this for a considerable amount of time, what would actually happen legally if Trump was to refuse to leave, if he was subpoenaed, if he was impeached, or they tried to enforce the impeachment hearings, and he just said no? Is there any kind of legal precedent that they would follow in order to to do that? And also, what would happen if that was also coupled with a Hail Mary for him to say, I'm going to declare a national emergency?
Yeah, so Danny, we are all living through uncharted territory with this president. I think the law would be clear enough that if he were impeached, that there's a way to make sure he leaves office. I don't think he can barricade the doors and stay somehow. So I'm not too concerned on that. Now, on your other point, though, there's lots of things. He was just considering an emergency over this fake border crisis, and then even the Tea Party in Congress told him he better not do that. So, I am hoping that if we get to the point that there are impeachment proceedings and he was impeached, we won't have that problem. But I certainly understand why you have concerns. There's so much uncharted territory these days. Sometimes it's hard for us to fathom.
Kurt in Goshen, Indiana, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. I got a question about the pension relief. I have 37 years, and I have still 5 years to go before I'm 62. And our pension is going to run out in 2025. Is there any chance that there's going to be any kind of legislature that's going to pass relief in the next year?
Yeah, so Kurt, as you know, last year there was a committee put together between both houses of Congress to try to deal with this, and they didn't deal with it. Multi-employer pension funds, there's a number that are at the breaking point, as you know, with central states and others, as well as other pension issues that we need to deal with as a country. They didn't get anywhere by the end of last year, but I do think now that we're in charge in Congress, this is an issue, the Butch-Lewis Act, that you're probably familiar with, which would help to solve the crisis that at least central states is facing right now, is something that many Democrats have supported. So I'm hoping that we might be able to pass it out and try to find a way to find some compromise with the Senate on this. So don't be totally despondent on this, even though many of us were not happy that last year things didn't move better. It just wasn't the right time with Republicans completely in control. But every member, regardless if you're a Democrat or Republican, have people who are affected by this. And I am still hopeful we can find a solution.
My recollection is that this all started in the 80s when the Reagan administration changed, or maybe Congress changed the law so that companies could book pension money as assets rather than as liabilities. Rather than as money owed to their workers, it was money that the company had, and thus it got tied up in bankruptcies and things like that. Am I remember that right?
Yeah, there was a number of problems, and there was an especially bad deal with UPS and some other things that all surfaced that created a lot of the problems.
Yeah, amazing stuff. Congressman Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls for him in just a second. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Minutes past the hour, Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes. Thanks for taking my call, Mr. Pocan. Maybe you can help me. If Donald Trump pulls out of NATO like he keeps bragging, can that fall under treasonous because it seems to help Putin? Or can you impeach him? Because it's not going to go far, because we got to start using Mitch McConnell in the same sentence as Donald Trump. They're both in the same bed now. Or am I talking stupid?
No, Russ, you're right. Mitch McConnell has decided to place his spine in the same place that they kept Paul Ryan's spine for the last 2 years, and not stand up to the president. Seems to not be willing to take any bill that we send over to reopen the government unless the president says he's going to accept it. So, him being up in 2020, I think he's worried about a primary, but certainly not going to get any profile and courage awards. So you're not wrong on that front. As far as NATO, I think there are plenty of Republicans that would not support that move. I think it's a lot of the president's ill-informed bravado on some of these issues. I don't expect that to be a reality, and I think he would get tremendous pushback from his own party.
Jeff in Fort Dodge, Iowa, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. Yesterday there was a vote on sanctions on Deripaska and his three corporations. 80% of the Republican United States senators voted to lift those sanctions. I am very afraid that there's millions and millions of dollars of Russian money that's going into these Republican candidates. Who is looking into this? And I know Mueller may part of this, but I believe that there needs to be a total investigation of money going to Mitch McConnell, our senators that are voting for these Russian Vladimir Putin corporations and companies. I'll listen to you off air.
Yeah, Jeff, I think, let me take it a little broader, because I think this is an issue as the House put H.R. 1, our first bill, a bill about campaign finance, ethics, and election reform. And there's some language in there right now that applies to foreign governments, and some of us would like to have stronger language, even if possible, otherwise there'll be bills introduced. I do think that that's a real issue we have to be looking at. I don't know right now if there's a place that it's being funneled other than we saw, for example, the influence with groups like the NRA. So a group that you traditionally would think would be out there for the gun manufacturers, like they've always been, not, of course, not gun owners, but gun manufacturers, we find out instead have been infiltrated by representatives of foreign governments. So I think the media and members of Congress and some committees are looking at this. I think a lot of us would like to see more legislation introduced in this area, and I think you bring up a very fair criticism and concern.
Peg in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I listen to a lot of progressive radio, and I've been hearing a lot of pushback about the Progressive Caucus being joined by the Blue Dogs, and that Pelosi kind of put people on committees that were on the more conservative side. Mr. Pocan, could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. What I have found is there are certain elements, social media especially, that really thrive by failure, and they don't ever want to ever think something good can happen. And you get used to it. You get thick skin when you're in my job, but you got people who think that everyone's a corporate shill and that the system is terrible, and there's many good things that happen. Specifically to what you said, first of all, there's no merging with Blue Dogs and CPC. We're about as far apart within the Democratic spectrum as possible. In fact, just recently when there were committee assignments given out, we had Pramila Jayapal and I, who are the co-chairs of the Progressive Caucus, got a commitment from Leader Pelosi that in the same proportion we are in the caucus, which is 40%, we would get on the exclusive committees. And lo and behold, I think we were at 54% for Ways and Means, 40% for appropriations, and I think it was 31 or 32 on energy and commerce. And to be perfectly honest, we only had one additional name that didn't make it on that committee. We probably wouldn't have got there with the people who wanted to be on anyway. But overall, that's over 40%. We just got on financial services, another one that we were fighting for, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley and Katie Porter and a bunch of other really impressive progressives. We're going to have a good number there. So there are some who think that, you're only pure enough. There's like one or two pure people in Congress. And, fine if that's what they want to think. I've got a big caucus. And are all 95 of our members in step on everything? No, but the vast majority of our caucus is very progressive. They're the ones who advance issues like Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, a lot of other standards. But there is a clear amount of misinformation out there, especially on social media. I've learned to kind of roll with it. It's a little difficult, although I do have to admit it is at times it does dampen the spirit when you see some of the chatter that's out there, especially when it's so blatantly wrong. Yeah. And unfortunately, some people just want to hear what's wrong rather than the truth.
One of the things I've noticed is an awful lot of people who are retweeting that kind of stuff have like 8 followers and 2,000 tweets.
I have noticed the same, Tom.
And I think they're bots.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, why are bots trying to sow dissension among Democrats? I think
like the activity we saw with the election.
Exactly. I think the answer is fairly self-evident. Congressman Mark Pocan, it's Middays with Mark. Congressman Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls. We'll be back with calls from Wisconsin, California, New Jersey, Indiana, California, Illinois, Oregon,
You're
Virginia.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Stick around. We'll be right back after the break with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. For our book club today, we're reading from a book edited by Cynthia McKinney, It's a compiled collection of essays titled How the U.S. Creates, shall we say, S-hole countries. I can't say that word on the air. And this is from her introduction, a deeper look at Trump's epithet, S-hole country. I wish I could take full credit for the idea of doing a book on President Trump's unfortunate characterization of some countries as S-hole countries, verified recently by fired ex-White House staffer Omarosa Manigault. The idea was brought to me by a Facebook friend, and I immediately saw the brilliance of that idea. Although at the time the president tried to walk back the revelation that he used such language to describe certain countries, he couldn't help himself. And during the visit of Nigeria's president to the White House, he doubled down on that characterization, saying that certain countries were tough places to live. It was only recently that Omarosa confirmed that, yes, the president had described certain countries as S-hole countries. The media had a field day with the, at the time, alleged remarks. Steve Dempsey of the Bay Area News Group compiled a slideshow of cartoons from national news outlets that lambasted the president. Lambasted, whatever it is. The Mercury News Online ran the slideshow that included hilarious cartoons by Rick McKee at the Augustus Chronicle and Bob Englehart with Kegel Cartoons and others. Mark Schuller, writing in the Huffington Post, noted, Haiti has been targeted for its decisive role in challenging what Southern planters, including 8 U.S. presidents, called a peculiar institution. The Haitian Revolution was the first time slaves were able to permanently end slavery and forge an independent nation. It was also a tipping point in U.S. history, leading to the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, paving the way for U.S. manifest destiny stretching from sea to shining sea and eventual dominance. Chicago, the country's third largest city, was founded by a Haitian, Jean-Baptiste Pont-du-Sable, who Haitian historian Mark Rosier called an agent of the Haitian government to pursue a pro-freedom international policy. End of quote from that. Jen Kirby went farther, and in an online media outlet Vox interview with a Stanford University history professor, the word eugenics was used as a descriptor for what Trump's characterization actually represented. Stanford professor Anna Minion said of the interview, what Trump said was basically a form of eugenics, in which he's saying, this is the population we want, people from places like Norway, white people. We don't want people from African countries or from Haiti. That's what's really symbolic here. Minion makes it clear that in the U.S. immigration debate, legality became a proxy for race without anyone overtly talking about it. Ryan Teague Beckwith and Maya Roden of Time magazine added their 2 cents worth to the discussion of the president's choice of words by choosing to discuss the immigration laws that occasioned Trump's telling words. They began the discussion this way. President Donald Trump's S-hole countries comment ricocheted around the world, spurring criticism from U.S. allies, rebuttals from Americans with roots in those countries, and condemnation from some in his own party. Reaction was swift around the world, including from those countries so characterized by the president. Zambia even humorously featured Trump's words in a tourism advertisement and appeal. My Facebook friend thought that the president's words should occasion a deeper look at what these so-called S-hole countries were, how they were created, and why they continue to exist. And that is exactly what the contributors to this book do. Sort of like the proverbial turtle sitting on a fence post, you know these countries didn't get the way they are without some help. And it's precisely that help from the U.S., its allies, its multinational corporations, its military, and United Nations peacekeeping operations in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which it also controls, on which this book focuses. Thus, the U.S. relationship to conditions in these countries is clear from U.S. military occupation of Haiti, financing of death squads in El Salvador, and support for dictators in all of them, indeed, all across the African continent. Therefore, for our purposes, an S-hole country is a country whose residents present quality of living conditions that can be tied to historical or current U.S. foreign and military policies that have negatively impacted the ability of that state to deliver quality of life policies to its residents. In this regard, for too many U.S. residents, the U.S. itself could be characterized as an S-hole country, resulting from its deliberate choice to fund the war machine and corporate policies that produce negative consequences for the countries and territories, in some cases colonies, that are profiled here. The United States as itself a S-hole country could be explored in much depth in future efforts. The characterization of certain countries as S-hole countries has captured the imagination of the global community, whether the localities and individuals concerned are for or against U.S. President Donald J. Trump. This book seizes this unique moment when attention of people inside and outside the U.S. is focused on the president's alleged words to explain the structure of international politics, the conditions inside certain countries, specific U.S. policies that created or maintain those conditions, and the consequence of those policies on U.S. residents themselves. How the U.S. Creates S-Hole Countries by Cynthia McKinney, or edited by.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. Bill in Midlothian, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. I have a question to ask that I haven't heard anybody discuss, and I had noticed it last year in the tax law, that it's form number 2106. Basically, anybody who's an employee that has unreimbursed expenses can't take that off the taxes anymore. And there's a lot of people that are going to be affected by that, and not just people in sales, but people that drive or people that have to do anything. And one of the reasons why I did not vote for Congressman Bratt was because of that one issue, because I could never, ever even get an answer as to why it was done that way, except for the whole macro picture of what the tax bill is. And there's a lot of things like that in the tax law. Everybody talks about, the drop in rate for the top 1% or 1/10%, but there's a lot of other stuff in the weeds there, like this, that I think can really affect people. And I don't think people are going to notice it until they do their taxes. I'm hoping with the new Congress that something can be addressed about that, even though I know that it's only going to go but so far with the way the Senate works.
Right. Let's give Congressman Pocan a chance to answer that, Bill. Thank you.
Bill, you bring up a great point, and something I've been saying for quite a while is that when people get their W-2s, and when they go to file their taxes, they are going to find out that a number of the deductions that were taken by middle-class, working-class people are not there. They didn't go after the deductions for the rich when they gave them the big tax drop, but they did take away things that affect working people. So a classic example, if you're a union electrician, and I heard this in Iowa and I heard it in Minnesota when I was on the campaign trail this fall, union electrician, you can no longer deduct your travel if you had to travel for work. You can no longer deduct your tools. You can no longer deduct your union dues. This union electrician I talked to in Rochester, Minnesota, had his accountant run on the program he had with the new rules his taxes for last year, and he would have had to pay $3,000 more in taxes under the tax cut that was passed by the Republicans. So there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be very unhappily surprised when they go to file their taxes, especially if they took advantage of some of those deductions that they needed to for work. So, Bill, you bring up a great point. In fact, I'm talking about doing a town hall in a few weeks on this back home, because I think a lot more people are going to be impacted by this than people expect.
Martin in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Martin, are you?
You're on the air, Martin.
Oregon.
Go for it. You're on the air.
Yes. Let's see. My speakerphone's not on. Just give me a second here. I can't hear you. I had.
Okay, Martin. I'm going to move on. Terry in Joliet, Illinois. Terry, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call. I listen to you since Air America. You guys are doing the work of America, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Terry.
So my question is, or the topic is, we're playing a lot of defense right now.
Terry?
Towards the next election.
Yeah, Terry, I'm sorry, your phone is breaking up. We're Ann in Santa Barbara, California. You're on the air, Ann. Thanks for listening to KPFK.
Yes, good morning. I know the Democrats in the House are planning on passing voting reform and campaign finance reform, and I'm just wondering if the TV and radio airways are considered public property that the companies have to get a license to use. Why shouldn't they be required to give free airtime to any serious political candidate or party, like I believe they have to do maybe in Europe? Mm-hmm. And also, I think a Green New Deal has to be absolutely a huge part of any jobs program. So thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Ann.
Yeah, and so the first part, we absolutely could do something like that. Whether or not it would make it through this current Senate and President, I'm not sure, but there's a good reason to argue that should be part of the ability to have public airwaves. There should be a public responsibility that comes with it. On the Green New Deal, I believe this week Alexandria might have dropped her bill officially. There is the committee that was formed by Nancy Pelosi to deal with climate change. But I completely agree with you. In fact, there's a couple components. One, if you build solar in the United States, windmill blades, we did that for a while in Wisconsin before Scott Walker got rid of an incentive that we had, but it's easier to move them one state to another rather than from overseas. That's a lot of good-paying, family-supporting jobs that come out of that renewables industry, and we really need to highlight that because there will be some job transition when you have an economy that's cleaner. But those can also be good union, family-supporting wage jobs, and it's a crucial part of it, along with health concerns and other issues. So I'm really glad that part of that debate is making it broader than just to talk about climate change. It's including all the subjects that you just brought up.
Lyle in Tampa, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thank you, gentlemen. Congressman, I'm curious about the non-investigation of Vice President Pence and some of his groupies. I'm wondering when that will take place or why it's not taking place. Thank you for all of your service. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to specifically, so I do apologize by non-investigation. He's not currently directly in any kind of investigation that I know of, although for all I know the Mueller investigation may be looking at things broader. But I do apologize, Lyle. I don't know specifically what you're referring to.
Okay. Danny in Tell City, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, I just called about the Trump investigation and stuff. He's a wealthy man. I don't think it's a two-tier system where wealthy people don't get punished in this country. They just buy their way out, and I think that working people, they're going to be punished. They get fined for $100 or something, and he gets away with millions. And I'm sure they could get him for tax evasion and treason. So, what do you got to say?
Yeah, Danny, I think you bring up a really good point, especially as it comes to the shutdown, for example, where Donald Trump said, people who don't get paychecks can just budget differently, and that's how he would do it. Donald Trump got millions from his daddy, and that's how Donald Trump was able to be in business and exist. Most people don't have a daddy with millions of dollars to give them. So, for most people, this is real life and death. Whether or not I'm hearing from constituents buying formula for their kids, paying for their mortgage. I'm talking to other members of Congress that are on the phone with property management companies that are trying to evict Coast Guard employees who aren't getting paychecks. This should not be a part of our job, but it is because Donald Trump has chosen to make working people's lives meaningless and try to somehow, use his life as a comparison. So you're right. He doesn't have the same life experiences and just doesn't get it.
Smitty in Kaunakaki, Hawaii. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, Smitty.
Kaunakakai.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, good morning. Aloha.
Good morning.
Congressman Pocan, has there been any movement on moving our federal elections every 2 years to a Saturday, or at least making, if it's still on a Tuesday, making it a national holiday so we have more good Democratic voters able to attend their polling places. Thank you.
Yes, Vinny, I think I don't care honestly who comes to the polls. Obviously, our efforts are to get Democrats out, but when it comes to if you want a democracy, you have to make it that everyone has access to the ballot. You want to make it as easy as possible. And I think what you mentioned, there are some provisions in our H.R. 1, and I know there are some provisions that didn't make it that I think are going to be amended. Matt Cartwright, a representative from Pennsylvania, for example, has a bill that I believe it's 2 hours you can take off of work paid to go vote. That would certainly help. Having it be a holiday would work, a Saturday. There's a lot of ideas we could have. Oregon right now does a mail program that's really boosted their turnout. We should look at every best practice, and our goal should be, regardless, we want the most people to vote, because the more people that participate, the stronger our democracy will be. Of course, I hope they vote Democratic because they agree with us on the issues, but bottom line is we have to make it far easier to vote, and we have to fight all these voter suppression laws, and much of H.R. 1 goes after those suppression laws.
Jill in Green Bay, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, gentlemen. I was wondering, I have been listening to the hearings for Barr, and I'm shocked nobody's asked him yet if he thinks it's legal for the president to pardon himself. Is there any way to get a colleague to ask this and get him on the record on it?
Yeah, Jill, I'll tell you, I've been real busy on House side stuff, so I haven't had a chance to follow all the proceedings. If that hasn't been asked, boy, I hope someone would ask it, right? That would be a great question to have asked. Again, because I haven't had a chance to watch all the hearings, being on the House side with what we're dealing with, that's a great suggestion.
Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, where we're fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. Thom Hartmann here with you. Mark Pocan taking your calls. And welcome back. Michael in Lakewood, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Now, let me get it off speaker. Hi. A couple days ago, you asked a question about why was there a shutdown, and you mentioned there was a picture of Rupert Murdoch going in to talk to McConnell, and I keep running through my mind some Grover Norquist, who said Republicans could control the government by controlling the legislative process through gerrymandering. And they could force the president to do whatever they wanted. Someone asked him, well, what would happen if a Democrat was elected? And he said they would force him to rule like a Republican. I'm wondering what's behind this. The shutdown isn't just an issue of embarrassing the president. But when you look at North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Michigan, if this isn't just part of a larger vision of decapitating democracy and issues of control. I'm just trying to connect some dots here.
Yeah, Michael, I'll tell you, this is just my opinion, and other members of Congress and the Senate may have a different opinion, but I feel that the president was getting an awful lot of bad press around Michael Cohen and him flipping the Mueller investigation. Things were not looking good for the president for a couple weeks in a row, and he had agreed to a deal with the Senate. That's why they sent a bill over unanimous to open government. And then all of a sudden, when a couple commentators said something, he decided that this was a great excuse to change the subject. And even though there's been a few pop-ups, like over the weekend about investigation and some of his dealings with Russia, he's largely taken it off the map of conversation because we're talking about something else. I think this is, in many ways, the real goal of what Donald Trump is up to, and he doesn't care who he hurts and what he damages and how he damages the country along the way, as long as it protects him from exposure. So personally, I think this is about Donald Trump covering Donald Trump's behind more than anything else, which is, again, why it's so sad that he's the president of the United States.
One wonder, we just have a minute to the break, one wonders if there might be some libertarian billionaires involved in this mix. There was a piece on Monday that was published on the Daily Caller, one of the top 5 conservative websites, by a senior official in the Trump administration who was being anonymous for reasons that will be obvious in a second. And he wrote, "We do not want most federal employees to return because we are working better without them." I'm quoting verbatim from this. "Now that we are shut down, not only are we identifying and eliminating much of the sabotage and waste in the federal government, but we're finally working on the president's agenda. Wasteful government agencies are fighting for relevance, but they will lose. Now is the time to deliver historic change by cutting them down forever." I'm wondering if that's Stephen Miller or somebody, but this sounds like a classic libertarian argument. Shut the government down to prove that most of the government's not necessary.
Although what we've seen in the last couple of days is just the opposite. They're telling people they have to go back to work for no pay because they need them, because they realize government actually provides services like giving people their tax refunds or protecting us via our airports. And
so you think maybe it's backfiring?
I think so. I mean, I think they did this out of pure ignorance. I think it was Donald Trump changing the subject, didn't know what he's doing, like the normal way he operates, and then now they're realizing that this has got ramifications they had no idea.
Yeah. I just got a fundraising email from Donald Trump. "Dear Fred," they address it to Fred Flintstone. The fake news media is reporting accurately on Trump. Trump's not going to budge even 1 inch on the shutdown, sources say. And then his voice, "Of course we won't budge. This is about more than a shutdown. This is about the future and safety of America." And then they've started this official Stand with President Trump initiative. They want us to donate money to him. It's amazing.
Yabba dabba doo, right?
Yeah, there you go. Coming up on about 10 minutes before the hour, Marion in Somerville, Massachusetts. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. I just wanted to make a comment about Barr. He said that he's willing to allow the investigation, the Mueller investigation, to continue, but the report might not be made public. And I find that an astounding statement. I thought the whole point was the American people wanted to know what had been going on all this time.
Yeah, Marion, I agree. I mean, I think a report like that should be public. I've actually, when I was elected in the very beginning, and specifically the beginning when Donald Trump got elected, there was a report that I had said we should have made public because I went and read it in a classified setting. So often, this information isn't classified for national security reasons, in my opinion. It's classified to protect certain interests that are more political in nature. And something like this, our tax dollars pay for the federal government. We should have every bit of information about our democracy. And I disagree with what Barr said. So hopefully what will come out of having the Democrats in the majority in the House is many of the investigations that we will begin now that I think by the end of the week all the committees will have been populated with members. We can start the oversight process. We'll get a lot more information for the public that is long overdue since Paul Ryan abdicated his responsibility to do so when he was the Speaker.
Marty in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman Pocan. I had a question regarding my HUD housing and my SNAP. I'm a disabled veteran here in Portland, Oregon. I have been on the streets before, living on the streets, and haven't been for the last 3 years. I've been in this HUD housing, and I'm just wondering if this shutdown goes beyond March, because I've talked to the people in HUD. And if it goes beyond March, they don't really seem to have the funding, and the same with the SNAP program. Can you please address that for me? Thank you.
Yeah, Marty, first of all, thank you for your service. I'm sorry about the situation that you've had to have in parts of your life being homeless, and, we owe it to you not to have that happen. I visited our homeless veterans facilities in Wisconsin, and I know what you're going through. So as far as what we're hearing on the shutdown, again, February payments should be okay, although we're having some housing issues already, where we've got some areas where we're running into problems and have to convince landlords to be patient given what's happened. But this is why Donald Trump doesn't understand real people are impacted. People who put their life on the line for the country are now worried about whether or not they have a roof over their head or food to eat, just so that he can, again, continue to try to find a changing of the subject. That's why I and many find this completely wrong disgraceful that this is what the president's doing. So we're going to fight to make sure that happens. I think the good news of the week, if it gives you any hope, is that they are starting to notice that some of these things have to happen. That's why they've ordered some people back at the IRS and at the FAA and some other agencies. So I think, this was done without any preparation, and I think we will get out of this. I just don't know quite how the president will get that done yet.
Linda in Holbrook, Massachusetts. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, hi. Thank you for taking my call. My question is, why do the Democrats not blame the entire Republican Party instead of just focusing on Donald Trump all the time? He would not have the power that he has if they weren't standing complicit with him. And I think they are totally responsible, and I put the blame squarely on them. And I saw a poll this morning on the Morning Joe show that said they blame only 5% Republicans. But I noticed Democrats don't blame the Republicans either. They say, oh, that Donald Trump. I'm just saying I think that he wouldn't have the power he has if the Republican Party, the entire Republican Party passed that tax cut.
Yeah,
the entire Republican Party almost
Linda, we got it. Let's let Congressman Pocan respond.
Yeah, Linda, no, I hear what you're seeing, and I think what gets reported, and I think for the most part you're right. The focus has been on the president since he said he would take ownership on it. What can you get more than his own words on video telling the Democratic leaders that he's taking ownership for the shutdown, although, of course, he's trying to shed that now. We have put more pressure on Mitch McConnell because Mitch McConnell's saying he won't take things up in the Senate that we're sending over. We've had many votes to hold House Republicans accountable, but interestingly, we're being joined by a number of Republicans each time we do these votes. So you're right. It should be bigger focused, but I think when you have the President of the United States say so very publicly that he's taking ownership, that's probably why most of the focus has been on him and, by extension, the Republicans in Congress.
Ed in Belfair, Washington. 2 minutes to the end of the hour, Ed. Quick question.
Good morning, Congressman Pocan. Mine has to do with the federal workers. Thank them for coming into work without pay. But if the ATF and the air traffic controllers were to actually walk off the job, could Mr. Trump have a national emergency and stick military personnel or the National Guard in those positions? Thank you.
Yeah, Ed, I think he could. There's a problem also if they don't show up, they don't get paid under the furlough rules. So it's an even greater hardship, like they won't get back pay, like we voted to do that. So, one of the things I think that if I was a TAA worker or an air traffic controller, I would have to look at how do you make Republicans understand something. The best way they understand things, I found, is when they're personally impacted. When a member has a gay son or a lesbian daughter, they suddenly might be for equality, but it takes them being affected personally. On Thursday between noon and 3, out of 2 airports in Washington, D.C., 90% of the members of Congress will be flying. If I worked for one of those agencies, I certainly think I would find a way to make it very personal about what the impact of their jobs are since they have to work for no pay. I just think they need to send a bigger message, but I don't think it's to not show up. And I've talked to them. They also are very committed to their jobs, but we need to make Republican members of Congress feel it personally, unfortunately, to make them understand what they're doing to the country.
Yeah, we have a lot of TSA members who listen to the show. If all the times that I get recognized in airports are any indication, and I said on the air a couple days ago, close down the pre-lines first, and you're going to have some serious leverage. Now, I'm not, I'm not asking you to recommend that, obviously, but
I'll tell you, I'm just saying, if I was a TSA agent in Washington, D.C. at either Dulles or National Airport between 12 and 3 on Thursday when 90% of the members are flying through there, I would find a clever way to make sure I get their attention. I find it hard not to say that.
And it's going to be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. Yeah. Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for dropping by again this week.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom, and thanks for your listening.
It is such a pleasure to have you with us every week taking these calls. Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you. Congressman Pocan's website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be back in the second hour of the program. Julio Rivera is going to debate me. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Preece. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out on the polls, at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well. Only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851, but the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. That was an extraordinary hour with Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls and some fascinating stuff, particularly his pointing out at the very end of the conversation that tomorrow between noon and 3, 80 to 90% of all members of Congress are going to be passing through 2 airports, Dulles and Reagan. And he was kind of wondering out loud, will those TSA screeners have something to say to those members of Congress? I don't know. Very interesting. Or will they just shut down the pre-line? I don't know. We'll see. Anyhow, also, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is out saying we really need to roll back the Reagan tax cut. We need to go back. The top tax rate was 91% from essentially, World War II. Well, really, the Great Depression from 1933 forward until 1967, when Lyndon Johnson dropped it down to 74%. And then Reagan came into office in 81, and I think by 84 or 85, he had dropped that down to 25% from 74%. And she's pointing out, hey, we had really, really good growth. The middle class was actually growing faster than the billionaire class during those 30 years that we had a top tax rate that was over 50%, almost 40 years. And the average CEO only took 30 times what the average worker made, whereas right now the number is between 271 and 10,000 times, depending on the industry you're looking at. And isn't it a good thing to have a more equal society? On the line with us is Julio Rivera, the editorial director at the Reactionary Times, a columnist with Newsmax, right-wing news, and Politichicks. ReactionaryTimes.com is the website. His Twitter handle is it's Julio. Julio, welcome back.
Hey, Tom. Happy New Year.
Well, Happy New Year to you, Julio. So what is good about CEOs making 500 times what their workers make, and the rich getting obscenely richer, and working people seeing their paychecks decline?
Well, just the way that you're framing the question, let me just say this. First off, in private business, if a CEO wants to pay himself exponentially more than his workers, and he's created that business, he does have a right to do that. But let me tell you something. This whole Ocasio-Cortez tax is a little bit of a mirage. I mean, people that are truly rich, making over $10 million a year, a lot of that is off of investments. And the capital gains tax is still going to be 20%. So those people aren't necessarily affected. The people
Reagan said that the capital gains tax should be exactly the same as the average income tax. In fact, he campaigned on that, and he actually got that in 1985.
Okay, but that's not what we're talking about here. What she's proposing is what is it, 70% on people who are making new income salary
over $10 million a year.
$10 million a year, exactly.
Yeah.
So I
what's
mean,
wrong with that?
That's not necessarily fair. Those people are still technically, in a sense, I know you're going to laugh this off, but in a sense, they're working class because they're actually working, providing a service for the money that they're being paid.
$10 million a year?
That I have too, huh?
$10 million a year?
10 million. Well, still, they still earned it. And the issue is, listen, government.
I think we have very different definitions of earned, Julio. But the question, I mean, what is wrong? Who can't live on $10 million a year? I mean, what's wrong with saying, okay,
It's not $10 million a year. I mean, it's by the time they hit, and they're going to get hit for the first $10 million, 37% of their money, and then everything beyond $10 million, 70% of their money. So if you have a $20 million salary, you're going to take home less than $7 million.
Oh.
But still,
I'm heartbroken.
You worked for it. No, and the issue
this is the whole point, Julio. Is we had in the United States for 40 years a period of time when the middle class, the working class in America, was actually their wages and benefits were actually growing faster than the wages of the top 1%. That all came to a screaming, screeching halt with Reaganomics, and the principal part of Reaganomics that killed the middle class. And what we saw, in fact, in 1980, when Reagan was elected, the average price of a home in the United States is around $80,000. Now it's around $230,000. The average salary has not changed since then. I mean, and the reason for that is because all that money has gone to the top 1%.
No, under Trump, wages are up. But listen, this part of the reason why people have an issue giving the government that much money is because it's estimated that about over $1.2 trillion a year is wasted. And these are the kind of things that they're wasting out on. $920 million for unnecessary printing costs, unused vehicles.
This has nothing to do with the argument, Julio.
Yes, it does.
If you want to cut the Pentagon, go for it. But that's a completely different conversation. We're talking about trying to balance the economy by discouraging rich people from taking enormous amounts of money out of their company so that they will do what they were doing before Reagan, which is leave that money in the company and pay their workers better.
No, that's not the solution. The solution is, and this is something that nobody has addressed yet, is really the wasteful spending. I'd like to see Trump in this year, this legislative session, address spending reform, because that's really we wouldn't have to.
That literally has nothing to do with what we're talking about, Julio. Are you changing the subject because you're losing the argument?
No, liberal progressives always are trying to find a way to take more money from the taxpayer instead of trying to figure out ways where we could be more.
I am trying to. Taxes do two things: they fund the government, which is the argument you're making right now, and they alter behavior. There's a reason why we have higher taxes on cigarettes and alcohol than we do on carrots and lettuce.
Shouldn't be trying to conduct sociological experiments.
This is not an experiment. It's already been done. We know.
Chimpanzee habitat for $52 million a year. Chimpanzee habitat. Really, I'm supposed to want to.
We know, Julio, that when you have a high tax rate, wealthy people pay their employees better because they can't take the money out because they don't want to pay taxes on it. What's wrong with that?
That's not necessarily true. Listen, you're going off of information. Listen, the business.
I'm going off U.S. Census data.
Years ago. You're talking. We're in a different economy nowadays. The fact of the matter is, if we open the door for something like this, where today's 70% proposal on income over 10 million will be tomorrow's proposal of 90% for all income over 2 million. It's just going to get worse, and that's why we have to fight back and roll back.
So again, that's a non-argument argument. That's absurd. It's like saying, we should not have. I mean, fill in the blank because somebody might abuse it.
What was the federal income tax rate in 1915? And look at the way that it's progressed over the years. The more
it was
you open up
91%
the
on
door-
income over, in today's dollars, about $360,000, which is frankly where I think it should be. I think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is way too generous with rich people, and I think the 70% tax rate should kick in. When Reagan came into office, that 74% tax rate kicked in when you made over about $320,000 a year in today's money, and I think that's where it should be.
Well, listen, the good thing is she can't even identify the 3 branches or units of government or whatever it was. That
This
she
has,
misquoted.
A, nonsense,
So there's
and B,
chance
this has
of it
nothing
ever
to do with
actually
that.
passing.
When you resort to personal attacks on people, it just tells everybody you've lost the argument.
Tom, I don't know why you guys have hitched your saddle to this woman. She's destroying your party.
Because she's saying
Joe
what's true.
Lieberman in the moderate wing is coming out against her. Tom Perez is a radical.
So I am still not hearing from you, Julio, why it's a bad idea to raise taxes on rich people. I have not heard an argument for that. What have I missed?
Because the government's just going to continue to waste that money on other. They're going to find other.
Well, right now Trump is borrowing $1
spend
trillion
the money on.
this year to waste on things. If you got a
listen,
problem,
that's one thing.
undo Trump's tax
Trump.
cuts.
That's not Trump. That's the legislators. There's progressive.
Well, it's the Republican
on both
tax cuts.
sides of the
I
aisle.
agree with you. It's the entire Republican Party.
Well, the Democrats and the Republicans. Listen, it's on both of them.
No, not a single Democrat voted for Trump's tax cuts. Not one.
Well, they should have.
In the House or the Senate.
Because it actually did something for the American people. Listen, I'm talking about.
It did something for the billionaires. There's no doubt about that. The Koch brothers made an extra $1 billion in a year.
Well, good for them. But
Donald Trump made money. He said to everybody at Mar-a-Lago, I just made you all richer.
Listen, you may not feel it, and maybe I may not feel it, and people in California and certain blue states may not feel the effects of the Trump tax cut plan, but that was a gift to his base, which was really the middle of the country. And
No, that was not a gift to his base. He was screwing his base by cutting taxes on rich people and thus consequently reducing wages for low-income people.
I don't know, wages are up, Tom.
Yeah, for the moment. Julio Rivera, editorial director at the Reactionary Times, columnist at Newsmax, right-wing news and politics, reactionarytimes.com. His Twitter handle is it's Julio. Julio, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day. And I've got this New York Times article about Bill Barr. This is mind-boggling. You got to read this. Stick around. And welcome back. Paul in New Braunfels, Texas. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, it had to do with what you were talking about before with the congressman. But one of the things that I've noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we ought to be focusing not on Trump because he's a narcissistic sociopath. And they're not going to get anything done with him. But I think we ought to focus on McConnell because, correct me if I'm wrong, if McConnell would vote, let the Senate vote, they would pass the bill that the Democrats have sent over there, which was their bill to begin with. And then the president would veto it, obviously, but then we could override his veto and make it law. Isn't that correct?
That is absolutely true. And in fact, a number of Republican senators have pointed that fact out. I believe that there's 4 of them now on the record saying that basically if Mitch McConnell would simply let us vote, we would open the government back up.
Well, I think the focus is to get off of Trump because he's not going to do anything. He's not going to change his mind. He's a narcissistic individual. So the only way we're going to be able to get anything done is to go after McConnell and start giving him a hard time about not and make it his responsibility because nobody is really pinning this thing on him particularly. They're going after Republicans and they're going after Trump, but they're not going after McConnell. And then the truth of it is, if we could get him to let that bill be voted, we would get out of this mess.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you, Paul. And one wonders, why is Mitch McConnell, unwilling to challenge Trump? Does it has something to do with the $3.5 million that his campaign committee took from apparently from a Russian oligarch? I don't know. Paul, thanks for the call. Len in Woodmere, New York. Hey, Len, what's up?
Hi. Well, the answer partly is that nobody even knows about that. Between the shutdown of the 2020 elections, the Democrats really need a longer-term strategy, which I would recommend that they'd be getting together today. I mean, assuming this goes into day 30, I would be getting together with Nancy and saying, we need to rent space in Louisville or some other large Kentucky city and hold our town halls there, marry Mitch McConnell to Donald Trump, marry all of this ugliness together, and run against them both and completely. And that's where they should hold their town halls. I mean, never mind, picking cities at random. Bring it right to their doorstep and start early, so that people know what they're doing instead of it being a guesswork. And start applying, to some degree, the Gingrich rule. Attach the words like ugly, racist, stupid, heartless. What people may not realize is Donald Trump, everybody knows, is a narcissist, could let this go on indefinitely. He has no concern whatsoever about anybody.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you, Len, and I do think that the Democrats are now using the strategy, and Nancy Pelosi is doing this brilliantly by saying that she's not going to let Trump give the State of the Union address. They're using this strategy of just, laying everything well, it's unfortunately all of it's at Trump's feet. I think it needs to, like you said, go after McConnell as well. But it's turning. I really believe that it's turning. I think that Americans are starting to say, really? And on top of that, what would Russia want? Would they want the government to be shut down? We'll see. We'll be back. We'll be right back. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So check it out, and thank you for supporting our program. Welcome back. Richard in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I was going to dovetail off of what you were talking about, Juan, about the tax rate, which, I always find myself in this particular argument with conservatives. And one of the things I always tell, and it's always a misnomer, because when somebody hears 90% tax rate, they think off of your gross income. And I try to explain, especially on the business, this is your net income, not off of the. So what that means is the way I frame it, I said, listen, capitalism is the name of the game. Our government is a sentinel of capitalism. That's it. I said, so you have two choices. You either participate in capitalism because that's what it needs to survive as consumption, or the government will force you to participate through taxation. So how you mitigate your tax liabilities, I'm an SBA lender. I do SBA loans for small businesses, and you see this all the time. When you expense things, if you are making that much net income, which is what you would be taxed upon, that net income, whether it be a C Corp or S Corp, whatever, is mitigated by capital investment in your company. So
right.
Increased inventories, equipment, more employees, like you were mentioning, is the thing that mitigates that risk. So quite often, if you elect to, let's say, buy more supplies to ramp up for the following year. By the way, if you're doing that well, you're doing that well because your retained earnings are so good that maybe you want to ramp up for the following year and buy more inventory. Well, who do you think's happy about more inventory being purchased? his suppliers, right? The business owner suppliers. Everything multiplies through the system and works, and that's why it's
right. So a high tax rate encouraging business people to keep their money in their company, and encouraging companies to keep their money, to invest their money in their employees and in new products and in new ways to produce product, increases productivity, which increases the wealth of all of us. Rather than just encouraging very, very wealthy people to skim everything off the top. Very well said, Richard. Thank you very much. George in Chicago. Hey, George.
Hi, Tom. I was just reflecting on your discussion with Mr. Revere, and I started thinking through things in my own mind that cost vastly more now today than they did in the past. Just a few examples. My parents, both of whom were World War II veterans, moved into a tract development that was built in the 50s after the war, an all-duplex development, and with a single-car garage, side drive, 2 bedrooms, living room, bathroom, and kitchen, they paid about $10,000.
Right.
That same type house in the same development today, as long as it hasn't had any kind of significant upgrades, will cost you $90,000 to $100,000.
Right.
Back in the 70s, you could buy a pretty nice car for about $4,000.
I remember when the Ford Mustang came out, it was $2,000 for a Ford Mustang.
Yeah.
That was in like '64, I think.
And now, if you want to buy a decent new car, you're talking $25,000 minimum.
Yeah.
But
wages have not gone up.
And wages haven't gone up. And I remember quite clearly, I won't mention the name of the firm, but it's a nationally known hamburger chain that used to sell 2 of their very top-of-the-line burgers with everything on it for $1.98. That same location, same company, now sells 2 for $6. That's 3 times as much. My wages haven't gone up 3 times in 20 years. In fact, they've been basically stagnant. And like most American workers, I'm paying more for my insurance and having to fund most of my retirement myself. There's no more fixed benefit pension funds anymore. We're down to like 22% of the workforce has them. And we're all at the vagaries of the market, which is controlled by the billionaires. And, we're risking everything to try and fund our retirements if we have any disposable income, which half the population doesn't.
Right. Yeah. No, this is the consequence of Reaganomics, and I think that this is starting to sink into Americans. George, thank you for the call. Very well said. I really think it's starting to sink in that basically Reaganomics has screwed the average American. And end of rant, I guess. Ron in Springville, New York. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Hi. I was just wondering, what has the shutdown cost us so far?
They're just starting to really estimate that seriously. In fact, there was a piece in the Financial Times today suggesting that the initial estimates of the cost of the shutdown were off by 50%. They were low by 50%. That it's costing us about twice as much as we thought. They're talking about the possibility that, for example, total GDP activity for the United States for the first quarter has already been reduced by 0.4%, and in fact 0.41%. And that's just, we're just 2 weeks into it, in this year. So if this shutdown continues into this first quarter, if it continues for the whole month of January, for example, it could shave a full percent off GDP for the quarter. And if that happens, then I think you're going to start seeing very, very consequential effects on things like, the stock market.
I know, because like the last shutdown, when the Tea Party shut us down, that was like $20 billion or something like that.
Yeah, you're talking 2013 when Ted Cruz did that over Obamacare, trying to kill Obamacare, and it was a substantial amount of money. Ron, thank you for the call. This and this is the conversation that broadly is not being had, but it's a real issue.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Our book today is Mortal Republic, How Rome Fell into Tyranny by Edward J. Watts. This is from the first chapter, which I think is really more like an introduction. This book explains why Rome, still one of the longest-lived republics in world history, traded the liberty of political autonomy for the security of autocracy. It's written at a moment when modern readers need to be particularly aware of both the nature of the republics and the consequences of their failure. We live in a time of political crisis when the structures of republics as diverse as the United States, Venezuela, France, and Turkey are threatened. Many of these republics are the constitutional descendants of Rome, and as such, they have inherited both the tremendous structural strengths that allowed the Roman Republic to thrive for so long, and some of the same structural weaknesses that led eventually to its demise. This is particularly true of the United States, a nation whose basic constitutional structure was deliberately patterned on the idealized view of the Roman Republic presented by the 2nd century BC author Polybius. This conscious borrowing from Rome's model makes it vital for all of us to understand how Rome's republic worked, what it achieved, and why, after nearly 5 centuries, its citizens ultimately turned away from it and toward the autocracy of Augustus. No republic is eternal. It lives only as long as its citizens want it. And in both the 21st century AD and the 1st century BC, when a republic fails to work as intended, its citizens are capable of choosing the stability of autocratic rule over the chaos of a broken republic. When freedom leads to disorder and autocracy promises a functional and responsive government, even citizens of an established republic can become willing to set aside long-standing principled objections to the rule of one man and embrace its practical benefits. Rome offers a lesson about how citizens and leaders of a republic might avoid forcing their fellow citizens to make such a tortured choice. Rome shows that the basic, most important function of a republic is to create a political space that is governed by laws, fosters compromise, shares government responsibility among a group of representatives, and rewards good stewardship. Politics in such a republic should not be a zero-sum game. The politician who wins a political struggle may be honored, but one who loses should not be punished. The Roman Republic did not encourage its leaders to seek complete and total political victory. It was not designed to force one side to accept everything the other wanted. Instead, it offered tools that, like the American filibuster, served to keep the process of political negotiation going until a mutually agreeable compromise was found. This process worked very well in Rome for centuries, but it worked only because most Roman politicians accepted the laws and norms of the Roman Republic. They committed to working out their disputes in the political arena that the Republic established rather than through violence in the streets. Republican Rome succeeded in this more than perhaps any other state before or since. If the early and middle centuries of Rome's Republic show how effective this system can be, the last century of the Roman Republic reveals the tremendous dangers that result when political leaders cynically misuse these consensus-building mechanisms to obstruct a republic's functions. Like politicians in modern republics, Romans could use vetoes to block votes on laws. They could claim the presence of unfavorable religious conditions to annul votes they disliked, and they could deploy other parliamentary tools to slow down or shut down the political process if it seemed to be moving too quickly toward an outcome that they disliked. When used as intended, these tools help promote negotiations and political compromises by preventing majorities from imposing solutions on minorities. But in Rome, as in our world, politicians could also employ such devices to prevent the Republic from doing what its citizens needed. The widespread misuse of these tools offered the first signs of sickness in Rome's Republic. Much more serious threats to republics appear when arguments between politicians spill out from the controlled environments of representative assemblies and degenerate into violent confrontations between ordinary people in the streets. Romans had avoided political violence for 3 centuries before a series of political murders rocked the Republic in the 130s and 120s BC. Once mob violence infected Roman politics, however, the institutions of the Republic quickly lost their ability to control the contexts and content of political disputes. Within a generation of the first political assassination in Rome, politicians had begun to arm their supporters and use the threat of violence to influence the votes of assemblies and the elections of magistrates. Within 2 generations, Rome fell into civil war, and 2 generations later, Augustus ruled as Roman emperor. When the Republic lost the ability to regulate the rewards given to political victors and the punishments inflicted on the losers of political conflicts, Roman politics became a zero-sum game in which the winner reaped massive rewards and the losers often paid with their lives. Above all else, the Roman Republic teaches the citizens of its modern descendants the incredible dangers that come along with condoning political obstruction and courting political violence. Roman history could not more clearly show that when citizens look away as their leaders engage in these corrosive behaviors, the Republic is in mortal danger. Unpunished political dysfunction prevents consensus and encourages violence. In Rome, it eventually led Romans to trade the Republic for the security of an autocracy. This is how a republic dies. Mortal republic.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour, and it's time for Geeky Science. Indeed, last year was the hottest for the planet's oceans since global records began back in 1958. We have now discovered, we didn't actually realize this until the last few years, that the oceans are absorbing about 90% of all the heat that we're generating on the Earth by burning fossil fuels. It's going right into the oceans. It's creating huge dead zones. Fish are migrating north to try to get into cooler waters. It's causing things like the red tides down in Florida. And it's causing the oceans to expand. Warm air takes up more space. Warm water, takes up more space. And so it's causing, the problems that they have, for example, in Miami Beach, where they're having these tides that are not tides, where it's just, soaking the countryside. This was published in the journal Advances in Atmospheric Sciences on Wednesday, and that the top 5 years of ocean heat have come in the last 5 years. I mentioned something about William Barr. If you go to the New York Times, if you have a subscription to the New York Times, you can search these old papers. And David Johnston, I wonder if that's David K. Johnston, wrote a piece on December 25th, 1992. It was a screaming headline across the entire top of the New York Times, right? The front page headline, all caps, Bush pardons 6 in Iran affair, aborting a Weinberger trial, prosecutor assails cover-up. It's the exact headline. And the article then goes on. It says, Mr. Weinberger was scheduled to stand trial on January 5th on charges he lied to Congress about his knowledge of the arms sales to Iran and efforts by other countries to help underwrite the Nicaraguan rebels, a case that was expected to focus on Mr. Weinberger's private notes that contain references to George Herbert Walker Bush's endorsement of the secret shipments to Iran. You get this? Weinberger was about to rat out the president. The president was still the president. It continues, the story continues. In one remaining facet of the inquiry, the independent prosecutor, Lawrence Walsh, plans to review a 1986 campaign diary kept by Mr. Bush. Mr. Walsh has characterized the president's failure to turn over the diary until now as misconduct. But in a single stroke, Mr. Bush swept away 1 conviction, 3 guilty pleas, and 2 pending cases, virtually decapitating what was left of Mr. Walsh's efforts, which began in 1986. Mr. Walsh bitterly condemned President Bush's action, charging that, quote, the Iran-Contra cover-up, which has continued for more than 6 years, has now been completed. The prosecutor charged that Mr. Weinberger's efforts to hide his notes may have, quote, forestalled impeachment proceedings against President Reagan and formed part of a pattern of, quote, deception and obstruction. On December 11th, Mr. Walsh said he discovered misconduct in Mr. Bush's failure to turn over what the prosecutor said were the president's own highly relevant contemporaneous notes despite repeated requests for such documents. As Mr. Walsh said, in light of President Bush's own misconduct, we are gravely concerned about his decision to pardon others who lied to Congress and obstructed official investigations. And then this, from the same month, this is from December 11th, 1992. It's an op-ed in the New York Times. It's titled, Mr. Barr's Cloud Growing Darker. By the way, it was William Barr who was Attorney General at the time that George Herbert Walker Bush did those pardons, which ended the special counsel's investigation of Iran-Contra. And this is just a couple of weeks earlier. Could Attorney General William Barr be trusted to produce a credible examination of his own administration's possible criminal aid to Iraq before the Persian Gulf War? The answer is worse than no. Far from allaying public doubts about the Bush administration improprieties, this squalid exercise inflames them. And this is about whether George Herbert Walker Bush was giving chemical weapons and other things like that to Saddam Hussein and calling it, quote, agricultural aid. It was a major scandal, and it got shut down. Again, William Barr, the Attorney General at the time, shut this stuff down with cover-ups and pardons. Expect to see the same if Barr is made Attorney General. It's just that simple. Karen in Mountain Home, Arkansas. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I enjoy your program very much, and especially how you take some of the callers and interviewees to task. And I was especially impressed with your interview with Julian Castro and how you took him to task on his understanding of taxes. And
yeah, although it's Julio Rivera, not Castro.
Oh,
Castro's the Democrat.
I guess when I turned on the radio, I just didn't get that last name. So anyway, so that makes me feel a little better. But I worked for a tax agency for a large state for many years, and any tax auditor can tell you that the one that pays the highest effective tax rate is not the wealthy, it's the working person.
Yep. Because
the working person does not have access to all the myriad tax shelters, and by the time that $10 million gets to the actual income that's being taxed, it might be $2 million.
Yeah, as I recall, Karen, when Mitt Romney was running for president, he released his tax reports, and what we found was that he had paid, in some years, as little as 10%, in average years, I think around 13 or 14%. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
Because he's a billionaire, because he's very, very wealthy, and he's got available to him all these tax avoidance schemes.
Yes. And one of the things that he was running on was that, if you increase the tax rate, it's going to make the small business person, it's going to just devastate them. But he really didn't distinguish between businesses that are corporations and small business corporations. If you looked at people that were mom and pop that filed on a Schedule C on their individual tax return, by the time they got to $250,000, and you can research this in the data on the IRS website. It wasn't even it was less than 1% of salaried people on an individual.
Yeah,
income tax rate.
Yeah, no, this is what's real. You're laying it out, and as a former tax worker, Karen, thank you. That's spot on and very well said. James in Orlando, West Virginia. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hello, Mr. Hartman. About this wall, Area 51 doesn't have a wall around it, and I guarantee if you try to go across that border, you're going to be stopped.
I've been there.
We can do the same thing with down in Mexico. Now, I've been thinking, why would he want a wall so bad? And I've come up with, well, did you know that the Russians own steel mills and cement factories in the United States? Now, the steel that goes into the wall, is it going to come from a steel mill that's owned by the Russians, or is it going to come from a steel mill that's owned by Americans?
Well, there is one major steel mill in the United States that is owned largely, as I recall, by Russian investors. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yes, sir. It's exactly what I'm talking about. And if the steel comes from a steel mill that's owned by the Russians, could there be any kickback from that business being done? What do you think?
It's amazing. Just thinking about it makes my head explode, James. This is it's like the level of corruption. James, thank you for the call. I mean, when you get that Trump is having these meetings with Putin and then destroying the notes, no president has ever done that, literally in the history of the Republic. They always want, because they're operating on the best interest of the United States rather than the best interest of the Trump organization, they always want there to be a witness to what happened in case the people on the other side say, oh, yeah, the president just said that he's going to do away with the U.S. nuclear arsenal or something like that. And so that you can say, no, that's not what was said. But Trump doesn't like that. That's bizarre. He's covering something up. Paul in Wells, Vermont. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you. I want to second and emphasize something that two callers previously said, and that is about the responsibility of whose mess this really is and the attachment of it to the Republican Party. I believe that Democrats fail in that end of trying to get their messaging out. It doesn't help, of course, with corporate media, especially Fox News, the cheerleading section and all that. But I think that any time that the word Trump is used, it should be attached, glued and screwed to the words "and the Republicans," because they're getting away with this, and they're not being made to pay for this. All of these things in this.
Well, here's the one piece of what may be good news in this, Paul. In all the previous shutdowns, all of them lasted less than 3 weeks, or 3 weeks and change. And as a consequence, it wasn't really obvious to Americans how much damage is done when the government stops working, because by and large they were able to move money around, and this public parks closed, but that was about it. Right. This time, if this continues for more than another week or two. This time it is, and by the way, and they have, and what the libertarian billionaires have always been able to do when those shutdowns only happened for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks is say, hey, nothing much happened when you shut down the government for a couple of weeks. We don't really need this much government. Let's have smaller government, right? This time it is biting. It is going so long that the actual damage is starting to become obvious. And the consequence of that, I believe, is that people are going to start saying, oh, government is important. Oh, we do need government. And I think that's actually going to blow up that whole Koch brothers argument that you can do away with half the government and not notice it.
I agree. I would just love to see the Democrats get better at this.
Yeah, I'm with you. And call out the Republicans, and especially Mitch McConnell. I'm totally with you, Paul. We'll be right back. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes, find out what's going on in the world today.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In a few minutes, we're going to be checking in with Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News to find out what's happening in the world. And then Andrew Yang is going to be with us at the top of the hour, by the way. It's going to be fascinating. And welcome back, Virginia, watching Free Speech TV in Aspers, Pennsylvania. Hey, Virginia, what's up? Virginia, you are on the air? No, apparently not. Jill in Princeton, Minnesota. Jill, you are on the air. What's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom. I know people are talking about government like it's a thing out in the clouds, but really, if we want a good government, we have to inform people. And we are the government. I'm a member of Move to Amend, and I know you're a great advocate for us, and you can speak on the high end for us. Move to Amend says corporations are not people, corporations are not a person, and money is not speech. But it also is about democracy, and democracy means we, the people. And I'm talking from the bottom end, and I'm in my second year, will be 2 years, in Brainerd, Minnesota for Move to Amend, and we've already made media coverage against our rally against corporate money in politics. And we're on our second phase now with a woman by the name of Jeanette Rankin. Mm-hmm. We are working on a play. And I'll refresh your memory. She is the first woman to be in Congress in 1916.
Wow.
And we're trying to unite. She also was an activist for immigrants and for the environment and for, of course, the women's movement.
So are you
She
doing
got the
this
vote
like
for herself.
in memory of her, or are you trying to educate people about her? I missed the association.
We're bringing in all of our groups in our area, to anything that is humanity, because she not only was a Congress person, the first woman, but she got the vote for herself, the for women's rights. But what we're doing with Move to Amend is we're bringing all groups together within this play. This is what Move to Amend is about. It's about bringing people together.
Yeah.
And you brought me into this movement. From you and one guy walked into our meeting last night, straight out, and he said, "I want to know how to save democracy." And I listened to Thom Hartmann, and he just showed up in our group.
That's great.
It was amazing.
That is great.
And thank you for all you do.
Well, thank you, Jill. Yeah, and Move to Amend is doing absolutely spectacular work. The website is movetoamend.org, and thank you, Jill. And what they're pointing out is that this whole idea that corporations should have human rights under the Bill of Rights, and that corporations should have the right of free speech under the First Amendment, under the Bill of Rights, are fictions that were literally created out of whole cloth by the Supreme Court. And because the Supreme Court created these fictions, the only way that they can be undone is by amending the Constitution, because the Supreme Court used the excuse of constitutionality to promote these bizarre ideas. And so Move to Amend is moving to amend the Constitution to say corporations are not persons and money is not speech. And it's absolutely brilliant work. Movetoamend.org is the website. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We're going to check in with Ellen Ratner at Talk Media News in just a moment. Stick around. Here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
By goatsfortheoldgoat.com, and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. And speaking of Ellen Ratner, she's on the line with us. Hey, Ellen, what's going on in the world today?
Thank you so much. Okay, well, there's a lot going on, of course. We still don't know what's going on with Theresa May because they haven't had a final vote yet, as far as I can tell. And that may happen late tonight in terms of whether they approve of her or not and whether they say no confidence. So we'll see. Okay. If you don't have a Senate or governor's job, well, you can join one of the networks because Claire McCaskill is joining MSNBC, and John Kasich from the great state of Ohio, which is where I'm from, of course, will be joining CNN. So there you have it. And you can get a job, and they'll pay you lots of money, I guess.
Yeah. And give you a platform that you could leverage into future runs for president.
Well, that's right. And as you know, Sherrod Brown may run for president. He's also from the great state of Ohio. And as you know, my crazy cousin ran against him, but didn't make it, thank God. And, of course, I supported Sherrod Brown. But the president, I don't know. But anything's better than what we got now, so what am I going to say?
I think Sherrod Brown would make a great president. I'd vote for him in a heartbeat. I'd campaign for him in a heartbeat.
Okay, well, so would a lot of people I know, so me too. And, of course, I would support Sherrod Brown. Okay, So now then the question is, will the shutdown, I'm hearing via the grapevine, that the shutdown might meet the goal of reducing the government, the size of the government, and that's why Trump may be supporting it. It's more than just a shutdown. It may be reducing the size of the government, and of course, Trump campaigned on that and went on that, and therefore he's supporting it.
Did you see the article that was published over in the Daily Caller a couple days ago by a guy who claimed that he was a senior administration official?
No, I didn't. I mean, I do read the Daily Caller, but remind me.
It was, I'm trying to see if I've got it here. Yeah, here it is right here. This is on Monday. He said, "We do not want most employees to return to work because we are better off. We are working better without them. Now that we are shut down, not only are we able to identify and eliminate much of the sabotage and waste, we're finally working on the president's agenda. Wasteful government agencies are fighting for relevance, but they will lose. Now is the time to deliver historic change by cutting them down forever." Sounds to me like Stephen Miller.
Well, the other thing they're saying is that the government workers only work 20% of the time, which is not my experience in Washington.
Right. Mine neither. I mean, this is the stuff that is being fueled by people like the Koch brothers, who basically just hate government because it regulates their ability to be profitable by dumping poisons in the atmosphere from their refineries.
Exactly. Okay. So now then there's been some studies on the impact of the shutdown. So far, the shutdown is 0.1%, but it's expected to double, even triple maybe. And so the shutdown has not caused problems yet, but it really, really will, say a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because there are all these, in addition to the government workers, there's government contractors. One of the airlines said that they're going to lose, I think it's Delta, they're going to lose something like $25 million because government employees won't be flying on them.
Right. Yep. And
So
Congressman Pocan left the show. He was on for a full hour taking calls in the first hour of the show today, and his last comment was basically kind of a wink and a nod to TSA workers at Dulles and Reagan. He said, Thursday between noon and 3 p.m., 80 to 90% of all members of Congress pass through those two airports. I wonder if the TSA will have anything to say to them.
Well, that would be very interesting, of course, because TSA needs to say something. Listen, I have to take a plane on Thursday night, and I'm going to get to the airport 3 hours early because of the TSA lines.
Yeah. And now the vice president of the airline or the traffic controllers union has come out and said that within a week she would not fly. This is a air traffic controller saying if this continues for another week, I would not fly.
That's very scary, to say the least. Okay, now the president has had active duty forces. They are going to remain on the U.S.-Mexico border till the 30th of September, which of course is when the budget turns into a pumpkin on the 1st of October. And so we don't know how many people that is. We know it's in the thousands, though. And we also know that the president wants to put up a wire wall while they're there.
Amazing.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
Okay, also a new caravan might be heading to the United States, and it will be going through Guatemala. It is from Honduras, and these are people who are saying that they want to seek asylum.
Yeah, and it's like 80 or 90% women and children.
Right, absolutely. So the Senate was going to defy President Trump on Russia, but it decided not to. They needed the 60 votes necessary for cloture in order to get a vote on the floor. They didn't get it, and therefore Trump can continue on to reduce what is going on in Russia. And he can...
So he gets to dial back the sanctions on Deripaska's steel and aluminum business.
3 companies that he can dial back the sanctions on.
Amazing. They couldn't find 7 Republicans?
It was 13 Republicans, but no, they couldn't find them, apparently.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, crazy. Now, ISIS has claimed responsibility. The question is whether there's 3 people or 4 people that were killed in Syria, but I thought we just wanted Syria.
Right. And in fact, about an hour after 3 or 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in Syria, Mike Pence said, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria."
Give me a break.
Get a clue, Mr. Pence. Yeah, Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News, brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen's new book, Loving What You Do. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. We're going to check in with Andrew Yang. He's running for president as a Democrat. Check this out.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
You know, here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program. This is, our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 Election and the Transformation of American Politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. Run, Bobby, Run is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby. even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s, before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Andrew Yang. He's an entrepreneur. He's the founder of Venture for America. He's the author of a new book, The War on Normal People, The Truth About America's Disappearing Jobs and Why Universal Basic Income is Our Future. And perhaps most interesting, he is running for president on the Democratic ticket for 2020. His website, Yang, Y-A-N-G 2020.com. Andrew Yang and his his Twitter handle is Andrew Yang VFA. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for having me, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. I was reading your book earlier today. In fact, we read it as one of our book reports here on the program. Fascinating stuff. You've really clearly, accurately diagnosed the problem in America, or at least many dimensions of it. What is it that, first of all, universal basic income, why is that a solution to many of the challenges that we're facing, the structural challenges that we're facing in the American workforce and labor force right now? And the follow-on to that will be, and then why base a presidential campaign on that?
Sure. So I spent the last 7 years helping entrepreneurs create jobs and grow businesses throughout the Midwest and the South. And I realized that technology is going to blast away millions of American jobs, in addition to the manufacturing jobs that have already been lost, and in my opinion, led directly to Donald Trump's election in 2016. If you look at it, we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Iowa, all the swing states that Donald Trump needed to win. And unfortunately, we're about to do the same thing to millions of retail workers. 30% of malls are going to close in the next 5 years. Call center workers, fast food workers, and most disastrously, truck drivers. Being a trucker is the most common job in 29 states. My friends in Silicon Valley believe that we are going to be reducing these jobs and other jobs very, very quickly in the next number of years. And so a universal basic income is, to me, the most direct and effective and expedient solution that we can bring to bear that's going to help make this economy work better for millions of Americans.
So let's describe that. A universal basic income means what?
Well, universal basic income is a catch-all label for a policy where every citizen or adult in a society gets a certain amount of money, free and clear, no questions asked, to pay your bills, start a business, go to school, do whatever you want. And so my plan, the Freedom Dividend, would give every American adult ages 18 on up $1,000 a month, free and clear. And people who are listening to this know where a lot of that money would go. It would go to car repairs, child care, tutoring services, the occasional night out, home repairs you've been putting off. That money would get pumped right back into our Main Street economy. It would grow the consumer economy by about 12% and would create several million jobs around the country. So that, to me, is a sort of dramatic solution that we need to bring to help rebalance the economy, because as you read from my book, the economy has become dangerously unbalanced in favor of big corporations and capital interests.
Now, Milton Friedman actually recommended something like this, back in the day, earned income tax credit, basically a tax credit. This is kind of a variation on the same thing, I suppose. But the critique of the universal basic income is that it's not addressing the actual structural problems with America, that it's not taking on this ownership society, basically capitalism. Richard Wolff, for example, the economist, would say, really the big challenge is having people own their own businesses, is having worker-owned co-ops, things like that. Direct assaults on capitalism itself. What do you think?
Well, I love entrepreneurship. I love cooperative businesses. I love collective ownership. And the best way we can make that happen is by putting buying power into the hands of more Americans, so that people in towns and communities around the country can take cooperative ownership of more of the businesses in their communities. But the tough part, though, is we don't have a time machine. We can't turn the clock back. We can't undo like a lot of what has happened over the last number of decades. And so the best way to get economic buying power into the hands of Americans directly, and this is a frustration I have with many Democrats, where I think many Democrats agree that the economy has gotten out of whack and is not serving people very well, but they still don't trust people. They still don't want to actually put money into people's hands. And so there's this grasping for solutions. It's like, maybe if we put money into education programs or retrading programs like that, that will help solve the problem.
Well, and Republicans will just say if you give people money, they're just going to goof off.
Yeah, which the data does not show that. I mean, right. I'm a very evidence-driven guy. But people who are fans of cooperative ownership models, I'm a fan too, and the best way to make that happen is through something like a universal basic income.
So your presidential campaign, I'm guessing most of our listeners and viewers have never heard of Andrew Yang, or if they have, it's in the context of, Venture for America or your book, The War on Normal People. Why run for president?
Well, if you look at the magnitude of the problems in front of us, where we're in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the country, and the third inning has brought us Donald Trump. Our government is literally shut down as we speak. Our institutions are failing right and left. And we do not have a whole lot of time because we are decades behind in addressing these challenges. If you believe my friends in Silicon Valley that we're only 5 to 10 years away from robot trucks hitting the highway, we do not have a lot of time to rewrite the rules of the economy. And so if you were to want to get this done in the next, let's call it, less than 5 years, then your range of options to make it happen are very limited. And running for president struck me as the best approach that would have a reasonable chance of succeeding.
I have your newsletter here, your campaign newsletter that people can get over at yang2020.com. And I spent Friday in New Hampshire visiting the Fossey family in Goffstown, New Hampshire, the recipients of the first Freedom Dividend. I didn't realize, I thought the Freedom Dividend was a proposal. You said that they're actually getting it. Tell me about that. And how's it working out in New Hampshire as you're campaigning for president?
Sure. So as an entrepreneur, you want to put your money where your mouth is. So if I think that Americans getting $1,000 a month would be good for families and individuals, then I should do that. So I had a call with the FEC to make sure that all was kosher, that I could give a gift to individuals and families out of my own pocket, and they said as long as it's your own money and they're not required to do anything, then have at it. So we identified potential recipients and families in New Hampshire late last year, and then the very beginning of this year we chose the Fossey family, and they're receiving $1,000 a month. And I'm happy to say they're already feeling like it's relieved stress in their family, and that they're positioned to make more of it this year. So I've committed to do the same thing in Iowa, and you're going to love this, Tom. A family in Georgia just said that they want to fund a freedom dividend for another family in South Carolina. So Americans love this so much, where they realize that $1,000 a month would make a tremendous difference in the lives of millions of Americans, and we can completely afford it. We're the richest and most advanced economy in the history of the world, and our economy is up to $19 trillion, up $4 trillion in the last 10 years alone. So this is eminently affordable, and it's a thrill when I got that message. I mean, imagine hearing from this family in Atlanta that they want to do the same thing.
Does this, though, become the next GoFundMe? I mean, does this just become like a, well, here's one more place that you can get a little bit of help in this economy that just sucks as a consequence of 40 years of Reaganomics?
Well, what I'm proposing is that we do it for every single American. Because if you look at GoFundMe, it's either heartwarming or heartbreaking, depending upon your perspective. Where you have Americans who can't pay medical bills, so they're turning to the community. I mean, that's messed up, truly. And so my plan is not for individuals, just like a handful of people to get the freedom dividend.
It's for
if
everyone.
I could afford it for everyone, I
So
would.
the question,
we want to make
and
this happen for everybody.
Forgive my interrupting, but we're going to hit a break here in a minute or so. So the Republican mantra, and I'm sure a lot of Democrats too, will be saying, okay, $1,000 a month, that's it's a start. Where's the money going to come from?
Sure. Well, the big change we need to make is right now our income tax system is going to be very, very bad at harnessing the gains from new technologies in the hands of companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook and Uber. So what we need to do is we need to join every other advanced economy and have a value-added tax. And a value-added tax would give the American public a slice of every Amazon transaction and every Google search. And because our economy is now so vast, a value-added tax at even half the European level would generate $800 billion, which, when combined with our existing spending and all the economic growth we'd experience by pumping this money into the economy, and all the savings we would be experiencing on things like emergency room health care and incarceration and homelessness services, a value-added tax is the key to enable us to afford a freedom dividend for every American adult.
And that's why every other developed country in the world has one, it seems. We're talking with Andrew Yang, the entrepreneur, founder of Venture for America, author of The War on Normal People. Andrew, will you keep us up to date on how your campaign is going?
Oh, yeah, and you just got the newsletter, but I have to say, you asked how things are going in New Hampshire. Things are going incredibly well. People understand that this economy is broken, and we have to make it work for us.
That's great.
So, yeah, we'd love to have a conversation with you regularly.
Great. Andrew Yang, yang2020.com is the website. Andrew, thank you so much. Good luck.
Thanks, Alan. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Good talking with you. And you too. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Fascinating stuff. Basically what he's arguing for is just exactly what Alaska has, or a variation on what Alaska has. And welcome back. Let's pick up some phone calls here. I just printed out a copy of the Washington Post for May 1st of this year. No, it's not May 1st yet, but the headline story: unprecedented. Trump hastily departs White House, ending crisis. Celebrations break out worldwide as Trump era ends. Entire globe breathes sigh of relief at end of dark period. President Pence begins clipped duck term. New president starts term penced in by predecessor's embarrassing reign of failure and crime. It's a phony newspaper, 8 pages, and it's being passed out all over Washington D.C. right now. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. Jacob in Berkeley, Michigan. Hey, Jacob, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. maybe you've touched on this before. I don't listen to your show every day, but I think in general, liberals and Democrats, what we don't do a good job pointing out is that Trump's not a liar. He's a dictator or a tyrant. George W. Bush was a liar. He lied a lot about the Iraq War, about tax cuts. Trump is incapable of ever telling the truth. He's just like any dictator, whether it's, in North Korea or it's Putin or name a country. If you take any of his speeches, you can replace immigrants and Mexicans with Kurdish people or Jews or any persecuted minority group. I think we need to stop calling Trump a liar and really saying he's a dictator. America has never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
And really, I don't think we talk about this correctly.
A wannabe dictator. Yeah, he's absolutely an autocrat in waiting. I mean, this is his entire worldview. Jacob, spot on. I agree with you, and I think you said it very well. Thanks for the call. Scott in Oxford, Michigan. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. Hey, I had I missed the conversation with Congressman Pocan. I wish I could have caught him. But if you were to go as a small business owner to get a loan, wouldn't you have to show what that loan's going to be spent on, how you're going to pay it back, and all the other details that are involved in order to get that loan?
Yeah, of course.
Why hasn't there been any kind of $5 billion breakdown given to Congress as to how the money that Trump is begging for his monument is going to be used? Wouldn't that be something that, if you were a congressperson, you'd want to see that before you even consider it?
Well, that's if you're taking it seriously. I mean, the best estimates are that if you want it, if we're going to build a wall that's going to complete the southern border, it's going to cost something on the order of $50 to $100 billion. The $5 billion is just a down payment on it. But Trump realizes that this is a scam. The whole thing is a scam. And so if Trump gets $5 billion and he uses that money to build 2 miles of wall, he'll send out lots and lots of pictures of that with him standing in front of it. It'll say Trump wall up on the top, and and everybody watching Fox News will think that he's finished the wall and he did it for only $5 billion. This is just a scam.
Well, I like your idea that you floated last week, end the subsidies for oil companies, the $300 billion. But I can go a step further. That $300 billion could definitely be used to build a wall that Mexico obviously is never going to pay for, but we can put all those oil company logos on the wall.
Yeah, there you go. Great idea. Scott, thank you for the call. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV in Oxford, Michigan. We'll be right back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. It's 22 minutes past the hour. William Barr, once again, tell everybody you know, this was George Herbert Walker Bush's cover-up artist who kept Bush and Reagan from being prosecuted for Iran-Contra. Now he's going to do the same for Trump. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Colin in Kirkland, Washington. Hey, Colin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to also bring up another point with the universal basic income and how that would virtually guarantee to not completely solve, but have a major impact on drug and gang-related crime. The right-wingers, they always like to harp on cities like Chicago and Detroit about how they've become these lost causes because the drug and gang crime is just completely out of control. And I think one thing that people don't understand is that, when you look at, when you watch some of these documentaries like on National Geographic that follow some of these drug dealers around, the common thread amongst all these quote-unquote criminals is that they always want to get out of town. They want a better life. They want to just finally get enough money so that they can leave this, their rotten life behind. And if you give, not just those people, but all people all across the country, even as little as just $1,000 a month, think of how much crime that would alleviate virtually overnight, because now people finally have the economic prosperity to actually live a meaningful and a good quality life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. That basically poverty is at the basis of a lot of crime. And I think that we understood this at one point in the United States. This was the predicating assumption on the war on, on the Great Society, Lyndon Johnson's programs, the war on poverty, he called it. And he cut poverty in the United States by half in about 10 years, in less than a decade. And then, of course, following Lyndon Johnson, Reagan came along and just destroyed all this stuff. So much of the Great Society, and continue to chip away at it. They want to go after Medicare and Medicaid next, which were cornerstones of the Great Society. Colin, spot on. Thank you. You nailed it. Robert in Kimberly, Oregon. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
The non-traditional economic plans, such as the universal basic income and co-ops.
Well, it's been running for quite some time in Alaska. They've got the Alaska Permanent Fund, which takes money from the oil industry and distributes a couple $1,000s every year to every single, man, woman, and child in Alaska.
Yeah. I was an Alaska resident years ago and received it for a few years while I was there. It was great.
Yeah.
What if we exaggerated it and gave everybody $1 million once, which is kind of the platform for a really interesting podcast that's gaining quite a bit of popularity.
Right.
And just how feasible something like that is. Either, the 1,000, or do you think this has traction?
Well, you've got 300 million people in the United States. If you gave $1 million to each one, that would be $300 trillion. I think that's more money than there is. But the idea broadly actually is something that Thomas Paine proposed in his book Agrarian Justice back in it must have been the 1780s, the late 1780s, maybe the early 1790s. And in that book, he suggested that at birth, every child be given an endowment of, I don't recall the amount, say $1,000, which is big money back in 1790, and that money be invested by the government on behalf of that person, and they have access to that money when they turn 21. And the idea was that by the time they turn 21, they would be not independently wealthy, but they would have enough of a nest egg that they could launch themselves into life, they could launch a family, they could launch a business, they would have a starting platform. And that was actually something that was very popular among the founders and framers. So,
good.
Yeah. So, Robert, it's not a totally radical idea. As I said, Thomas Paine was kicking it around back in the day, and I think we should revisit it. And that's a variation on what Robert was just talking about. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Why isn't William Barr's role in covering up George Herbert Walker Bush's crimes with regard to Iran-Contra being talked about in the media?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Is it because they just don't want to embarrass Bush? I mean, is that it? We're Republicans? I don't get it. Our book today is The War on Normal People by Andrew Yang. This is from Chapter 2, How We Got Here, page 12. The Great Displacement didn't arrive overnight. It has been building for decades as the economy and labor markets changed in response to improving technology, financialization, changing corporate norms, and globalization. In the 1970s, when my parents worked at GE and Blue Cross Blue Shield in upstate New York, their companies provided generous pensions and expected them to stay for decades. Community banks were boring businesses that lent money to local companies for a modest return. Over 20% of workers were unionized. Some economics problems existed. Growth was uneven and inflation periodically high, but income inequality was low. Jobs provided benefits, and Main Street businesses were the drivers of the economy. There were only 3 television networks, and in my house we watched them on a TV with an antenna that we fiddled with to make the picture clearer. That all seems awfully quaint today. Pensions disappeared for private sector employees years ago. Most community banks were gobbled up by mega banks in the 1990s. Today, 5 banks control 50% of the commercial banking industry, which is self-mushroomed to the point where finance enjoys about 25% of all corporate profits. Union membership fell by 50%. 94% of the jobs created between 2005 and 2015 were temp or contractor jobs without benefits. People working multiple gigs to make ends meet is increasingly the norm. Real wages have been flat or even declining. The chances that an American born in 1990 will earn more than their parents are down to 50%. For Americans born in 1940, the same figure was 92%. Thanks to Milton Friedman, Jack Welch, and other corporate titans, the goals of large companies began to change in the early 70s and early 1980s. The notion they espoused that a company exists only to maximize its share price became gospel in business schools and boardrooms around the country. Companies were pushed to adopt shareholder value as their sole measuring stick. Hostile takeovers, shareholder lawsuits, and later activist hedge funds served as prompts to ensure the managers were committed to profitability at all costs. On the flip side, CEOs were granted stock options for the first time that wedded their individual gain to the company's share price. The ratio of CEO to worker pay rose from 20 to 1 in 1965 to 271 to 1 in 2016. Benefits were streamlined and reduced, and the relationship between company and employee weakened to become more transactional. Simultaneously, the major banks grew and evolved as Depression-era regulations separating consumer lending and investment banking were abolished. Financial deregulation started under Ronald Reagan in 1980 and culminated in the Financial Services Modernization Act of 1999 under Bill Clinton that really set the banks loose. The securities industry grew 500% as a share of GDP between 1980 and the 2000s, while ordinary bank deposits shrank from 70 to 50%. Financial products multiplied as even Main Street companies were driven to pursue financial engineering to manage their affairs. GE, my dad's old company and once a beacon of manufacturing, became the 5th biggest financial institution in the country by 2007. With improved technology and new access to global markets, American companies realized they could outsource manufacturing, information technology, and customer service to Chinese and Mexican factories and Indian programmers and call centers. U.S. companies outsourced and offshored 14 million jobs by 2013, many of which had previously been filled by domestic workers at higher wages. This resulted in lower prices, higher efficiencies, and some new opportunities, but also increased pressures on American workers who now had to compete in a global labor pool. Automation started out on farms earlier in the century with tractors and then migrated to factories in the 1970s. Manufacturing employment began to slip around 1978 as wage growth began to fall. Median wages used to go up in lockstep with productivity and GDP growth before diverging sharply in the 1970s. Since 1973, productivity has skyrocketed relative to the hourly compensation of the average wage earner. How workers are compensated and how their companies perform stopped even being aligned over the same period. Even as corporate profitability has soared to record highs, workers are earning less. The share of GDP going to wages has fallen from almost 54% in 1970 to 44% in 2013. While the share going to corporate profits went from 4% to 11%. Being a shareholder has been great for your bottom line. Being a worker, not so much. Today, inequality has surged to historic levels, with benefits flowing increasingly to the top 1% and 20% of earners due to an aggregation of capital at the top and increased winner-take-all economics. The top 1% have accrued 52% of the real income growth in America since 2009. Technology is a big part of this story, as it tends to lead to a small handful of winners. Studies have shown that everyone is less happy in an unequal society, even those at the top. The wealthy experience higher levels of depression and suspicion in unequal societies. Apparently, being high status is easier when you don't feel bad about it. Companies can now prosper, grow, and mint record profits without hiring many people or increasing wages. Both job creation and wage growth have been weaker than the top-line economic growth would suggest since the 1970s. In each of the last several decades, the economy has created lower percentages of new jobs, including no new net jobs between 2000 and 2010. Andrew Yang, The War on Normal People. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Tax deduction. I mean, cool stuff. There's a lot of ways to regulate these companies. And it's so good to see that Congress is actually, or at least the Democrats in the House of Representatives, and Gene Shaheen's in the Senate, starting to do something about it. Thank you for supporting patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Brian in Riverside, Connecticut. Hey, Brian, it says here you want to disagree with me. What's up?
Well, Tom, I don't necessarily want to disagree with you, but I do want to disagree with Andrew Yang. Autonomous trucks, it'll never happen in the United States. They will try, but it'll never happen. I drive an over-the-road truck. I've been doing it. I've had several trucks and several drivers with me for 40 years between Salt Lake City and Greenwich, Connecticut, New York. In fact, if you ever had a Idaho potato, I probably brought it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways.
Well, Brian, here's a possibility, something that they've actually developed, they're using right now in China, and that is where you take a lane of a freeway and you designate this as the trucks only lane, and then you run in that lane about an inch below the top of the asphalt. You cut a groove for the 300 miles of the highway or whatever it may be. You cut this groove and you lay a wire in that groove, and you electrify that wire, and the semi-autonomous vehicles, the driverless trucks essentially, they track that wire. And so it's sort of like a railroad car. It's got its own lane. There's no way into it or out of it unless you're a truck. Go ahead.
I agree with you. I can understand the principle behind it all. But
well, he's saying in 5 or 10 years, we're going to have that here. You've got that in China right now.
Let me ask you this: do you want to be anywhere near an 80,000-pound torpedo on the Jersey Turnpike or somewhere?
No, that's the point of giving them their own lanes.
Well, you get your own lane, but if something goes wrong, that truck's coming out of that lane. It's coming down the road 53 feet sideways, and it's not stopping.
Yeah.
And they could lock the brakes up, and forget about that. The $1,000 he's talking about giving to everybody in America, this, that, or whatever. If you have an autonomous car and it's actually working and something goes wrong, how far do you think that $1,000 is going to go when you still have to feed a family or whatever? I would say his theory would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 or $6,000 for each person. And then if you're taking that money from somebody who's making it, well, then we're back to slavery again.
Yeah. Well,
A makes the money, guy B enjoys the benefits. Right?
Yeah, I don't think paying taxes is slavery, but I get your point, Brian. And what he's talking about is, $12,000 is not enough to live on, and he's not suggesting that people should live on that. He's suggesting that basically it would be an infusion of wealth into, what drives an economy is spending. And this is, classic economics, Adam Smith 101. It's not debt necessarily, although debt-driven spending will stimulate an economy. But basically what drives an economy is spending. And which is why it was so outrageous when Reagan came out and said, no, what drives an economy is supply-side economy. No, it's demand side.
Tom, let me say this. I worked in the ski industry in Park City, Utah for years and years and years. And I had many conversations with the head of Snowbird, Alta, and Disneyland. I think it was Eisner or whatever his name was then.
Yeah.
Anyways, they always talked about the dollar. Now, if you notice, a ski lift ticket is almost the same price as it is to go to Disneyland for a day. Well, now you take a family of 4 that has to, even if they drive in, even if they're locals, from downtown, $125, $145 a day at Park City, Utah to go skiing. You take a family of 4, that's a $600 nut to crack before you even had lunch, before you had dinner, before you anything else, right?
I get all that, Brian. I don't see what that has to do with what we're talking about here. What I'm saying is that the universal basic income is a demand stimulus. And just like the in the year after the Republican crash of 2008, Obama got the 1%, as I recall, of the withholding from for FICA suspended for a year. And what that did was it gave people an extra, $100, $200, $500 a year to spend, and it immediately went into the economy. So, if you're passing even relatively small amounts of money, I mean, back when George W. Bush did his tax cut in 2001, or maybe it was early 2002, Bernie Sanders kind of shamed him by saying, well, you should at least give every American $300. And so he did. And there was a measurable impact of that, just that $300 to everybody in the country. That's all I'm talking about.
Yeah, I hear you, but let me go here. Things aren't getting any cheaper. They never will. We've seen it. Rents go up. Rents everywhere. I'm not talking about housing rent. I'm talking about
but during the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, while prices were going up, wages were going up faster. So functionally, things were getting cheaper. And then Reagan came along and flipped the top tax rate from 74% down to 25%, and suddenly wages came to a screeching halt. But costs continued to explode.
Wants to go up to 70%. Bernie wants to give away free this and that. And as a working guy, my incentive to work every day hard is to supply the things for my family other than the basics. They want to go on a vacation. They want to buy new clothes. They want to buy a better car. They want to go to college. I got to earn that. Nobody's going to hand me that. And this generation of the X generation or the millenniums, they got to understand, they got to get out and bust their ass and work. It's never going to stop. You always have to have people.
Brian, I'm a big fan of the work ethic, too. But that said, I think that there are a couple of areas that we are treating as if they should be privatized that really should be part of the public sphere, and in particular, education and healthcare. These are things where every other developed country in the world provides every family in their country with all the healthcare they need for free and all the education that they need, all the way up to an MD for free. And you've got the entire Republican Party saying, "Oh, we can't do that in America. We're too stupid."
No, we're not too stupid, but we we can't give away the farm when we have people coming.
It's not the farm. It's education and healthcare in every other country in the world. Costa Rica can do this. The reason I went down to Costa Rica last year for some filming for this documentary that we're doing, and the cab driver, who drove us out to the rainforest. He was talking about how, I said, what do you like about Costa Rica? And he said, I have free health care, and my family has free health care, and 2 of my 3 sons have gone to college for free. And he said, here in Costa Rica, we can do this. I don't know why you guys in America can't do it. And it's like, I don't know why either, except that we've got to have, the Koch brothers have to be able to go from being worth $10 billion 10 years ago to being worth $80 billion now, somehow magically through the wonders of the tax code and all this kind of stuff. It is a screwed up system. Brian, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. David in Mamaroneck, New York. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi. I just wanted to call about your conversation with Julian Rivera.
Yeah, David, you need to get your mouth closer to your microphone.
Hello, is that better?
Yeah.
He kept mentioning the fact about somebody making over $10 million in earned income. And I just did some, simple calculations. I think there's something like, if you take the stock market, that's $30 trillion, corporate bonds are $9 trillion, bank deposits are $9 trillion. It comes out to about $70 trillion, and that's not even counting rental properties, which is all owned by the top 0.1%. I think the top 10% has at least 80% of those assets.
Yeah, what's your point, David?
My point is that people making over $10 million a year, it's not earned income. And the phrase that you always use and FDR use, they're economic royalists. And we're really just all paying paying.
Yeah, I agree. And
tribute to
Julio
them.
sort of admitted that when he said most of these people are making their money off investment income. And that was his argument for I'm not sure what, because I would say, fine, raise the capital gains tax to 70% as well. But spot on. David, thank you for the call. Chuck in South Milwaukee. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Not too much, Tom. Listen, the William Barr matter with the Iran-Contra also needs to be understood in the historical context that several days before the pardon of Weinberger, a federal judge had ordered Weinberger to turn over those diaries.
Right, to Lawrence Walsh, to the special prosecutor.
That's right, to Lawrence Walsh. And Bush Sr. was going to just pardon Weinberger in order to try to get out from under it. And it was Barr himself who said, no, you can't do this just by pardoning Weinberger, because it will be suspicious. You'll never get away from the accusation that you've done this just to protect yourself. You have to pardon them all.
Now, Chuck, I spent a good chunk of the morning here going through the 1992, December 25th, actually the whole month of December in the New York Times, looking for articles about Bill Barr's participation in those pardons. And there's some just scathing op-eds by William Safire, for example, just calling it a crime and a cover-up. But I couldn't find anything that specifically said that Barr was the guy behind the pardons. What is your source, Chuck?
If you go, Robert Perry and I forget his cohort that ran Consortium News.
Right.
They for decades were on the Iran-Contra trail.
Yeah.
And a lot of this sort of information comes from their discoveries over the years and things that they were able to flesh out.
Okay, I'm going to have to do some more Googling or DuckDuckGoing this afternoon. Chuck, thanks. I agree with you, and I think that the Republican Party pulled Barr out of the refrigerator basically and sent him in specifically to save Donald Trump. I really believe that that's what's going on, and I think he's going to do it. I think he's going to recommend that Trump pardon all these people, just like he recommended that George Herbert Walker Bush pardon all those people. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
46 minutes past the hour. Your call's up next here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Antoinette in Puyallup, Washington. Hey, Antoinette, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind today?
Well, I want to talk fast because it's the end of the show. I am, a senior citizen, so I'm not totally good with tech stuff, but it seems to me like there's so many young people or so many people that are doing Facebook and Twitters and stuff. Wouldn't it be a possibility to have a Twitter rampage online and saying objecting to the shutdown and also objecting to William Barr? Although I guess we can't stop that. But couldn't we start some kind of a campaign with Twitter or Facebook or whatever saying
it's already happening, Antoinette.
It is happening.
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of activity all over Twitter and Facebook. I've tweeted a whole bunch of stuff about Barr. I'm just amazed that it's gotten so few retweets. It makes you wonder about the Twitter algorithms and whatnot. But
how do I tweet you? How do I tweet you?
I am
have a couple
at
things I'd like
Thom
to
_THOM_ Hartmann HARTMANN.
Thom _Hartmann.
Yep.
Thom _Hartmann.
That's it.
Okay, That's it. That's how I tweet.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm glad there's something going on, but I wish it would get bigger.
Okay. It will. Antoinette, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Jackson in Issaquah, Washington. Hey, Jackson, what's on your mind?
Hey there. I'm the opposite end. I'm 26, so maybe your youngest caller of the day. Love the program. I always love that you source your opinions on facts. They're always based on that, and not just opinions where you find facts that support them. What I wanted to mention is I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, but I live in Washington now, and I work as a server. And in Missouri, they've got a rule where you pay servers and tipped employees as low as $3.15 versus minimum wage up here is $11.50 or just got raised to $12.
Right.
And a lot of times people in Missouri and conservatives specifically will cite that in places like this where the minimum wage goes up, rent cost goes up, and the price of things goes up.
Mm-hmm.
But based off my anecdotal experience, the price of things doesn't go up a lot. And even if you spend more percentage-wise on income, let's say I'm making $3,000 a month versus $2,000 a month, but my rent cost might even proportionally be higher, I still have more cash to work with. And so raising wages just generally provides you more income. And even if, like, at the end of the day, percentage-wise you spend more on the rent, if you have more money, you can do more things regardless.
Yeah, it's kind of a common sense approach. I mean, and so the question in my mind, the thing that challenges me about universal basic income is you put it into place, and the first couple of years you've got it, you're going to have a huge economic stimulus, but eventually that's going to wear off, it seems. Or maybe I'm missing something.
No, I think you're spot. I wasn't advocating for single payer. I was really
UBI.
UBI, yeah, correct. More so, I was just saying that wage differential is currently, long term, you might think about UBI, but I think it's kind of infeasible until a lot of jobs actually get taken by automation to implement.
Right.
But in the short term, really, I think the battle we should fight is wages.
Yeah, I'm with you. Jackson, thank you for the call. Very well said. And thanks for being our youngest caller so far today. It is 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and my thoughts and the news of the day right after this. Stick around. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Important stuff. You've got to check it out. Thanks for supporting our program. Welcome back. Chris in Littleton, Colorado. You wanted to get back to the issue of autonomous trucks?
Yeah, Tom. 2 years ago in October of 2016, they did an autonomous truck test from Fort Collins, Colorado to Colorado Springs. It's about 120 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And it was successful.
Wow.
And I called you before. I think I talked to one of your screeners and just off air. And about that time, I called in about a movie on YouTube called Do You Trust This Computer? And that caller, he wants to get everybody to go and get a job. And unfortunately, there aren't going to be any jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It's all going to be done by machine.
Well, and I mean, so far what we've seen is, Andrew Yang points out in his book, just in the last decade, I think a decade or decade and a half, 14 million jobs have gone to low-wage countries, mostly China, and then another 5 or 6 million jobs have been replaced by automation.
Yep. And if you watch that movie, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, all of those guys, they believe in a universal
basic income, yeah.
basic income.
Yeah, and while Stephen Hawking never weighed in on UBI, to the best of my knowledge, he was outspoken in saying, don't trust that computer. So spot on. Chris, thank you for the information. It's great to hear from you. Ken in Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Ken, what's up?
Well, I hear him talk about how much health care and education is going to cost. What I never hear him say is, how much money do we lose because people are afraid to move on from their job, open up their businesses, because they have to stay there to get that health care?
Yeah. No, it's a huge drag on the economy. The fact that we've got employer-provided health care prevents people from going out and starting their own companies. Absolutely.
I watched it. I worked 30 years in a UAW shop, cradle to grave, with insurance, and I saw many guys that had great ideas but couldn't leave the factory floor because they couldn't walk away from the insurance.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it's one of the very strongest arguments for universal health care. Ken, thank you. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about some of the ripple effects into the economy from the government shutdown. My daughter is a U.S. Nurse Corps scholar, which means she has a full paid scholarship for nursing school, which she graduated from. She just got a job offer in another state. We're in Pennsylvania, and she has a Pennsylvania professional nursing license, which required an FBI background check, fingerprinting, along with a whole lot of other professional licenses that require FBI background checks with fingerprinting.
Right.
She now needs a new license because her job offer is in Delaware, which is very close to where we live in Philadelphia, just almost over the border.
Right.
She can't get the job because the FBI isn't processing the fingerprinting from the state police of Delaware.
Wow.
Each state that you would go into as a nurse has their own professional licensing. Now, you multiply that out with doctors, pharmacists, medical technicians, any place where there's controlled substances, the DEA is involved. That means every hospital in the United States that's trying to hire somebody once this shutdown started won't be able to because they can't get FBI background checks done. And
That's
every
incredible.
single state has professional licensing that not only goes there, it goes beyond that. Wherever you have any kind of critical security situation, and you know how much of a national security state we've become, so many occupations require the FBI to fingerprint you, put your fingerprints on file, or check them against existing fingerprints to see if you are whatever,
Yeah.
you know, a Russian spy.
Has your daughter been told that there is a particular period of time, or is it basically everything's on hold until the shutdown's over?
Well, everything's on hold. Unfortunately for her, she's got a job in a place where, to meet the requirements of the U.S. Nurse Corps, she has to go to an area that's in dire need of nurses. So she can't just go to like the nicest hospital in downtown Philadelphia, which is one of the reasons why she's in Delaware. They're willing to wait for her. They love her. They want her to be a part of their staff. So they're willing to wait for her. The problem is she's broke. She's a brand new student. So she got a local job with a home nursing organization, and
to tide her over. Yeah. And thank you, Paul, for sharing your story. I mean, that's what this country is made up. You know, there's millions and millions of stories of individuals who are struggling against the damage that Donald Trump and the Republican Party, and Mitch McConnell in particular, are doing to this country. Why are they harming us? I think this is a question that really needs to be asked. Why are Trump and the Republicans harming Americans? We'll continue the conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
Visit ThomHartmann.com.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. China